Good evening. I'm Bernard Green, Chair of the Brookline Select Board, and this is the regular meeting of the Select Board for February 4th, 2025. Let's start off with announcements, and I'd like to start off by saying that I suspect that there will be many comments concerning the Washington Street project that is on our agenda. That will not be a public hearing. The Select Board will present its comments to the Transportation Board, which is meeting tomorrow, and this project will return to the Select Board for a vote on February 11th. That meeting also will not be a public hearing. I anticipate that people will use public comments to state their views. I suggest that a more effective way to communicate with the Select Board on this issue is to instead of using the 15-minute public comment period, to put your comments in writing and email them to the Select Board. We've received a lot of comments. I'm sure everyone reads them all, and many people have done that, though much of what I see repeats what have already been stated. So bear that in mind when you compose your comments. You want to add to the Select Board's understanding of the issues before them. So with that, any other comments, announcement? Yes, Michael.
One thing, there was an interesting article in the Boston Globe today about the mayor of Boston, Mayor Wu, suggesting that the city put in place an ordinance that would manage or attempt to manage the speed of food delivery drivers. And certainly one of the things that we're going to be talking about here in Washington Street is bicycle accommodations. And one of the aggravations that many people have is not with cyclists, but rather with the motorized two-wheeled vehicles that are delivering foods. And I think it would be appropriate to say to the Transportation Board and transportation staff, who's all here, that this is a topic that it would be worth following. Let's see what Boston does, see if it sticks, as it were, and perhaps follow suit with something of the similar nature.
Thank you. Paul.
Yep. Thank you, Bernard. I just wanted to briefly mention that on February 10th, which is Monday, this upcoming Monday, there will be a meeting of the Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee. This will be a roll up the sleeves workshop for the steering committee members to continue the work of crafting a vision statement and themes and topics that will help drive the creation and population of the comprehensive plan. So that's starting at 7 p.m. It's a hybrid meeting, and I believe we're going to be downstairs, but check the calendar. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other updates or comments? I'm sorry, Chad.
Yeah, that's right. I just wanted to note the passing of retired police officer Judith Hoban. Officer Hoban began her career in Brookline in 1975. She was the first female officer in the department's history. And she served here with great distinction until 2007, nearly 32 years. So I just wanted to note her exemplary record, her trailblazing career, and extend our condolences to her family and friends and all who knew her. It's truly, it's remarkable that it wasn't until 1975 that we had a female police officer. The past is, as they say, it's not dead, it isn't even past. It's well worth, I want to extend our condolences and talk about that memory of her service, her long years of service to this community.
Thank you. And hopefully the police union or someone will maybe give us some information on her service on the department. I mean, it's information that I think would be important for the community to know about. John.
Yeah, late to the late arriving, but I have just one announcement I want to make. I think we all are aware that there's a number of people in the community who are right now intensely focused on their futures, and they are intensely focused on their rights for reasons that have to do with some of the orders that have come down from the White House. There's a group that is doing its best to answer the questions that all of those folks and their advocates have. It's the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition. And they have several sessions coming up where they will, through their trained, attorneys and lawyers in this field, do their best to fill people in on their rights. And I'm not going to go into the details of the dates and so on, but people can look that up themselves. By the way, they do a pretty good job of language access, so you needn't worry that you won't be able to access this information if you happen not to be a primary English speaker. So it's Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition, and I urge people who think they might want to attend one of these sessions to look up the schedule of sessions, Know Your Rights. Thanks.
Great.
Can I follow on to that
Yes,
just really
please.
quickly? I just wanted to add to John's comment. Thank you. Town departments, the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Community Relations has republished a Know Your Rights brochure that's being distributed across town departments. If you come in, we have those in multiple languages available for you and online. No questions asked. So please feel free to take advantage of that if you need to.
Thank you. So finally, I do have another announcement. So this month is Black History Month, and we'll be reading a proclamation later on in the meeting. But I want to mention that as part of that, or part of the celebration and events associated with Black History Month, the Martin Luther King Celebration Committee is co-sponsoring with Ken Liss and the Brookline Historical Commission, I think it is, a talk by Ken Liss on a strange movement back in the 1920s called the, and I hope this is not offensive, but this is just what it is, the Black Mammy Monument proposal, which was a proposal of the Daughters of the Confederacy that caused a number of people in the country to organize and object to the creation of such a monument in DC. One of the leaders of this movement was a Brookline resident who Ken Liss is going to tell us about on February 9th, before the Super Bowl, so don't worry, at the Brookline Village Library. That'll be from 2 to 4, I believe. But anyway, it's one of the many events other than Martin Luther King Day that the committee organizes throughout the year, and this is going to be a very interesting one. Of course, Ken Liss is a wellspring of knowledge about Brookline's history, and this will be very interesting. So, thank you. Anything else? Okay, so let's move on to public comment. Tiffany, explain the rules.
Thank you for joining us for public comment. This is an opportunity for us to hear your perspective on the issues in Brookline that matter to you. Each person speaking tonight is limited to 3 minutes. You don't need to use the entire time, but you may if you like. Once 15 minutes has been met, there's an opportunity at the conclusion of the Select Board's business for additional comments. Members of the public sometimes raise questions during public comment. We may be able to provide a quick answer to a question, but are more likely to work with staff to get a more thorough answer and respond over email. We'll let you know when you have 30 seconds remaining and when your time is up. Please conclude your remarks at that time. If you have more to say, you're welcome to send an email to board members expressing your thoughts in greater detail. Any person wishing to speak must begin their comment by identifying themselves with their full name and either their precinct number or street address. The first speaker who signed up in advance is Liz Linder.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to speak and share some comments, and thanks. Okay, hi, I'm Liz Linder. I've lived and owned a business in Brookline Village for over 20 years. I'm also a town meeting member for Precinct 4, and I'm running for a seat on the Select Board. We all want to inhabit safe, inviting neighborhoods with accessible, thriving commercial districts. I've been listening to business owners, residents, and other vested parties throughout the design of the Washington Street corridor and offering my input. I want to thank the Design Review Committee and project team for being responsive to concerns voiced by numerous community members. I understand that based on these concerns, the plan has been updated to include a parking study, wayfinding, and a percentage of spaces added back. And I have a few suggestions related to the implementation of these additions. The Brookline Village parking study should be completed early enough in the planning phase to impact project implementation. One of the goals of this study is to identify opportunities for replacement and additional parking, along with better parking utilization to meet the changing needs of the community. Wayfinding to help users access the commercial districts must include both signage and electronic input to major mapping apps. I also propose that an advisory group made up of adjacent residents and business owners be involved in the parking study and wayfinding phases of the project. It's important that the parking spaces added back in Washington Square and Holden to Station Street remain in the plan to mitigate the impact of reductions in this area. I also ask that the project team commit to working with the neighborhoods and business community throughout the project to minimize disruptions during the construction phase. Small businesses are particularly impacted by even seemingly minor disruptions that impede serving customers. If we can support the independent business community while providing safe access for all users of the corridor, I believe the community as a whole will benefit, and I would encourage support of the 25% design approved by the Design Review Committee. And thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. The next speaker is Ailish Gilligan, who's online. Ailish, I'll promote you now. You can start your video if you're comfortable.
Thank you, Tiffany. Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm sure you're sick of hearing from me, but here I am, Ailish Gilligan from Washington Square District. I live at 121 Beaconsfield Road. I have lived in Brookline for over 15 years, and I've operated my business for over 23 years. I'm here tonight on behalf of over 22 business owners in Washington Square who have signed a letter expressing strong opposition to the removal of 18 parking spaces along the commercial section of Washington Street in the square as proposed by the Complete Streets project. Our businesses are composed mainly of minority-owned people, and we are all deeply concerned about the impact this decision will have on our ability to survive and serve the community. The square does not have a public parking lot, meaning that every single parking space is critical to our customers, our employees, and delivery access. Removing these spaces without a viable alternative is not just an inconvenience, it is a direct threat to the economic stability of our district. The economic recovery for local businesses remains very fragile. There are 3 businesses currently listed for sale in the square and 2 empty commercial listings on Washington Street along the route that is proposed. We are also concerned that the Transportation Department and its consultants have not collected or shared, if they have collected, data from other towns where similar projects have been implemented. Center Street in West Roxbury is a perfect example. Learning from others' experience is crucial to ensuring such projects succeed without negatively impacting local business areas. In West Roxbury, for example, the number of commercial listings for sale or rent has risen to 17, an all-time high since the installation of the bike path. Business owners have declared revenue declines in the range from 20 to 40% also in this area. We do not want to see this happen in Washington Square. The absence of this data or similar data from the project team raises concerns for all of us about the feasibility and the practicality of this current design. Unlike other neighborhoods in Brookline, our businesses do not just serve a walkable, hyper-local customer base. We welcome patrons from all over the state who rely on accessible parking. Many of our customers call ahead to confirm the parking is available. Some are late for reservations because they cannot find parking. Some cancel. It happens every night that I work the host stand. We understand, however, the importance of improving streets for all users. We also support efforts to improve multimodal transportation, but the current plan is just not equitable. The needs of all stakeholders should be
30
balanced.
seconds.
Adjustments made by the Transportation Board to ensure our concerns have been inadequate. We need a project that truly balances the needs of cyclists, pedestrians, drivers, and local businesses. We urge you to consider this and work toward a plan that ensures a thriving, inclusive, and accessible Washington Square for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ailish. The next speaker is John Bowman. John, are you in the room?
Thank you. My name is John Bowman. I'm a resident of Park Street, a town meeting member in Precinct 10, and a frequent user of Washington Street. I'm speaking in favor of the proposed design for the Washington Street Complete Streets project. I join the 14 other Precinct 10 town meeting members and the 1,400 biking Brookline petitioners, more than 100 of whom, like me, are seniors, asking you to recommend a complete streets design for the Washington Street project, including protected bike lanes along the entire corridor from Beacon Street to Station Street. I live without a car in Brookline. The proposed design will greatly improve conditions for biking and walking on Washington Street, both of which I do regularly. It will enable me to continue cycling safely as I age, and my ability to safely mingle with cars and trucks on the street declines. And it will welcome me if and when the day comes that I need to get around in a wheelchair. Please support the proposed design for the Washington Street Complete Streets project. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Brian Ladd. Brian Ladd is online. Brian, I'm promoting you now. You can start your video if you're comfortable. Begin your 3 minutes.
Good evening. Brian Ladd, Precinct 13, town meeting member. I appreciate the chair's admonitions at the top of the meeting about comments about this project at Washington Street. I've expressed particular views in various forums. What I mainly want to do here tonight is express my admiration and respect for the Design Review Committee, the consultants, and everyone else who's engaged with the project. I've been to many meetings, and my impression is of a project in which the consultants have constantly and frequently revised it in response to community comment. And I think the final product is as close to a consensus as we're going to get in this town. I would say that it seems to me that the main source of confusion has arisen from the fact, not the consultants' fault, but their remit is that 60 feet between the buildings on Washington Street. And so when they reported a reduction of so and so many parking spaces, there was fear and misinformation that all the parking was being wiped out and that kind of thing, which then resulted in a process of discussion widening the picture that hadn't been there before. And also a wider discussion of the far from simple and direct relationship between parking and the thriving of commercial districts in a place like Brookline. And the result is that the committee has recommended the parking study will go along with the final project. And I think that's the perfect solution. And I look forward to seeing the process and the project taken to completion. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. The next speaker is Regina Frawley.
Thank you. I will try to wait until the end of the night if I can take it. You've used up the 15 minutes with your present speakers, and I know that's the limit for the public comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Emily Jacobson.
Are we supposed to do it at the end or?
Oh, nope, we still have time for now.
All right, okay. Thank you. I'd like to speak about the Washington Street Complete Streets project. I am the Vice President of Biking Brookline and the newly elected Chair of the Bicycle Advisory Committee. So
would you just mind introducing yourself and giving us your precinct number or your?
my name is Emily Jacobson and I'm in Precinct 5.
Thank you.
And so I hope you won't find it disingenuous if I talk to you mostly about pedestrians and crosswalks, but even I can admit that my feet serve for more than just pedaling. So the Washington Street Complete Streets project, first of all, Washington Street is not in a great state for people who get around by foot. Think of all the school children who use this street, Pierce School, the Driscoll School, the high school are all accessed by this street. So is the library. This project will have raised crosswalks at most minor street crossings, which will greatly increase the visibility for pedestrians. It has updates to 2 street crossings that I particularly would like you to be aware of and to highlight. It's the Washington and Davis Avenue, where At the moment, the lack of a pedestrian signal causes me to look behind my shoulder the entire time while I cross the street, and which has been for a really long time on the list of remediations needed. The intersection at Washington School and Cypress Street that has outdated slip lanes and where hundreds of school children cross every day. It's extremely long waits for pedestrians and a dangerous crosswalk. I'm sure you can talk to the crossing guard there about it if you'd like to hear more. And Washington and Weybridge Street, which is an extremely long crossing at the moment. This street will be narrowed significantly, making it a much safer crossing. And the last thing is rapid flash beacons at all the crossings, the length of Washington Street. I want to highlight these because an inordinate amount of time has been spent talking about bicycles and parking, and there's very little money that is dedicated to pedestrians, solely pedestrians in town. This is a huge project for people walking.
30 seconds.
It's important not to lose sight of this. Although I don't think it's perfect, I think it is the best we can get. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is David Krupp.
Good evening. My name is David Krupp. I live in Precinct 8, and I'm the president of Biking Brookline, which is a bicycling advocacy group with 1,000 members in Brookline. I know we've given you a lot of public comment, so I just wanted to highlight a few key points. First, our petition, where 1,468 people have signed a petition asking for protected bike lanes on the corridor, and that's about 1,200 Brookline residents. Importantly, that includes 70% of the town meeting members in the precincts through which the project runs. It also includes a majority of the total town meeting members, and it includes a majority of the members of the school committee. Also importantly, it includes 130 Brookline High School students and over 140 residents who are over 70 years of age. And I think those two data points are important because it really shows that safe bicycling accommodation really serves the whole community. I also just want to briefly comment on the business community's concerns. In our comment letter, we pointed to many studies that have shown that projects like these, which have been implemented all over the country now for quite a long time, have had no adverse impact on business. And I think it's really not that surprising because most of these projects are in places like Brookline that are real destinations. They're not strip malls where people expect to be able to park directly in front of a store. I have a lot of confidence in our small businesses and I want to support them. I think most people will not be too concerned if they have to drive another few hundred feet to find a parking space. And I do think it's important to look at this from a percentage basis. In Washington Square, if you consider all the parking available, we're talking about a loss of just 11%. And down in the village, we're talking about a loss of 6%. And if you look in our comment letter, you can see our analysis, including our many daily observations. And we could never find a day when there wasn't sufficient parking on the corridor, even with the reduction in parking. And then the last point, of course, is we've got a lot of wasted parking resources in both locations. And this is not unusual. In fact, the Wall Street Journal had an article about this last year under the caption, "America has too much parking," really. And they explain how we have this tendency to just overbuild parking. And I think that's happened here as well. Thanks very much for accepting my comments.
Thank you. Regina, we still have time for one comment. And that concludes folks who signed up in advance. Do you want to go now? Or okay. That concludes folks who signed up in advance. We do have time for one more. Is there anyone else in the room who wishes to speak during public comment at this time? Anyone online, please raise your hand using the raise the hand feature. All right. Looks like no one is indicating their desire to speak.
Thank you, Tiffany. First on our miscellaneous calendar will be a question of proclaiming February 2025 as Black History Month in Brookline. The proclamation that we will vote on is as follows, and I apologize, it is not very long, but it's going to take more than a minute. but I've been told that it's important information that people want to hear, so. So whereas the Brookline, Massachusetts Select Board recognizes that there can be no accurate and coherent American history that does not include the history of Black Americans. And whereas the history, culture, and contributions of Black Americans have historically been omitted or deleted from the study of much American history, and such omission or deletion continues to the present day with explicit bans on the teaching of important aspects of Black history and literal and symbolic book burnings. And whereas the suppression of the history of Black people foreshadows the suppression of the history of other groups who have struggled for civil and human rights, such as women, LGBTQ communities, Native Americans, Jewish communities, the labor movement, and ultimately any history that highlights the uncomfortable truths that are necessary to learn to avoid repeating mistakes of the past. And whereas historian Dr. Carter G. Woodson in 1926 organized historians and others to designate a time to promote and educate people about Black history and culture as a critical component of the advancement of Blacks in America. And whereas the idea of a time to study the history of Black people grew in acceptance in the 1960s, it evolved into what is now Black History Month and was increasingly celebrated in communities, colleges, and universities in America, and acknowledged by each presidential administration, beginning with President Gerald Ford. And whereas Black History Month has become such an integral part of the American calendar that even the current president, Donald Trump, on January 31st, 2025, signed a proclamation recognizing Black History Month. Although while in the same week attacking diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in the federal government. And whereas efforts to undermine Black History Month, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and other initiatives to include in the American experiment all of the brain power and skills of our diverse nation makes America weaker and less competitive in the global marketplace, which makes it more important for local municipalities like Brookline to increase its commitment to the celebration of Black history and the related goals of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Okay, that's the end of the recitals. Now, therefore, on this 4th day of February in the year 2025, the Select Board of the Town of Brookline, Massachusetts hereby proclaims that 1, the month of February 2025 shall be celebrated as Black History Month in Brookline. 2, in furtherance of the town's celebration of Black History Month, the Brookline Select Board urges town departments and other local governmental and non-governmental bodies to develop programs, ceremonies, and activities to recognize and celebrate Black History Month as appropriate to their missions. 3, the Brookline Select Board further urges all residents to use Black History Month to A, start a year-round process of study and reflection on the history, culture, and contributions of Black people in America, whether American-born, foreign-born citizens, or immigrants to America, as an integral part of their understanding of America's history and its greatness. B, take advantage of the many programs being produced for Black History Month in Brookline and in the surrounding metropolitan area, including those programs listed or linked to on the web pages of the Brookline Public Library, the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Community Relations, the Public Schools of Brookline, and the Martin Luther King Jr. Celebration Committee. C, visit cultural institutions and the exhibitions, performances, and lectures on Black history, literature, and art at local museums, universities, and concert halls to learn about renowned, especially Brookline African-American literary, artistic, and academic persons, such as Brookline artist John Wilson, whose moving maquette bust of Martin Luther King Jr. is displayed just downstairs on the first floor of our town hall, and who will be highlighted in the exhibit, Witnessing Humanity, the Art of John Wilson, at the Museum of Fine Arts from February 9th through June 22nd, 2025. And if you're in New York, it'll also be at the Metropolitan Museum of Art at a later date. Second, world-renowned singer Roland Hayes, writers Marita Bonner, who wrote for the Brookline High School newspaper, The Sagamore, Loretta Ruffin Ridley, and Ridley's mother, Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin, and historian Dr. Adelaide Cromwell. And and the many lesser-known but important residents in the history of Brookline, including skilled workers, professionals, business owners, servants, and even enslaved persons who made a contribution. Finally, in the current national atmosphere, the Brookline Select Board urges everyone to reflect upon the words of Amelia Boynton, a key organizer of the Selma campaign and the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge on what would be known as Bloody Sunday. She said, "You can never know where you're going unless you know where you've been," which can be seen as a rebuke to those who would ban and burn books and erase important parts of American history, and that articulates the critical importance of Black History Month and other observances of the diversity of America. Thank you. So I move approval of the proclamation proclaiming February 2025 as Black History Month. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. John Van Scoyac.
Aye.
Michael Sandman.
Aye.
Paul Warren.
Aye.
David Perlman.
Aye.
And chair votes aye. Thank you. Next, the question of approving the meeting minutes from January 28th, 2025. Unless anyone has some corrections to the minutes, I'd like to move approval. Seeing none. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. John Van Scoyac.
Aye.
Michael Sandman.
Aye.
Paul Warren.
Aye.
David Perlman.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Next, unless a select board member wants to pull an item out for discussion, I move approval of items 3C to 3F in omnibus fashion. No one wants to pull anything out? David?
I do have a question regarding 3E.
Okay.
So regarding some of these new positions for the Division of Sustainability, I'm wondering how quickly do we think that this Deputy Director of Sustainability would get started? Do we already have work available for this person to do?
There's a lot of work available. Yes. We're really eager, particularly now that we have a Parks and Open Space Director who's joining us imminently, for us to be able to turn our full attention to both the climate action plan and the variety of smaller issues that are arising around town that we need to do. And that's definitely more work, more than just the work of one person. So we're eager to get that person started and get Alexandra the support staff she needs to, move expeditiously on her work.
Okay.
Okay, any other items people wanted to discuss? Okay, then I move approval of item 3C to 3F, omnibus fashion, of course. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. John Van Scoyac.
Aye.
Michael Sandman.
Aye.
Paul Warren.
Aye.
David Perlman.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Next, calendar. We have first on the calendar, home rule petitions, an update from our representative, Tommy Vitolo. Mr. Vitolo, or Representative Vitolo, step to the mic and talk to us.
Good evening. I am Representative Tommy Vitolo. I live at 153 University Road in Precinct 10. My phone is on mute, but you can feel free to call me at any time, 617-872-8921. I'm here to give my biannual update on Brookline's home rules. I know that the members of the Select Board know many of these ins and outs, so forgive me if I'm also educating folks online and perhaps in the auditorium. Home rules are legislation that applies specifically to a single city or town in the Commonwealth, as opposed to the rest of what we do, which is general legislation applying to all cities and towns. And traditionally, home rules are used to address circumstances that are unique to the municipality. One example is if a municipality wants to tweak a rule about their local government, perhaps they want to change the number of transportation board members from an even number to an odd number. That would be a home rule. The rest of the communities don't really care. Brookline should do, Cambridge should do, Attleboro should do what makes sense for them. And as long as the legislature is satisfied that it remains democratic and fair, those are fairly straightforward to pass. Where home rules become much more challenging is when a local legislature effectively aspires to be a state legislature and propose legislation that is broader than appropriate just for that community. And I assure you I will have examples. And so most communities in a given 2-year cycle file 0 home rule petitions. The second most common number, as you might expect, is 1, perhaps 2. Last session, Brookline had 16. 16. We passed 1. And I'm very proud of the one we passed. To remind you, we passed an Article 97 home rule petition, which required not a majority, but a 2/3 majority of this legislature and had to be done by July 31, 2024, not December 31, 2024. And that was to allow geothermal at Pierce School, which called an Article 97 because it had to stand up to Article 97 of the Massachusetts Constitution, designed to preserve parks and open space. And because we were building geothermal wells 5 or more feet below the surface of the park, we were encumbering the park and therefore needed approval from the legislature. Sure enough, folks in Cambridge or Quincy or Attleboro were perfectly fine with that. And I want to thank starting with the town administrator, town council, several different boards, committees, and commissions in Brookline, including the select board, for shepherding through that process. We had a very tight timeline. In fact, we literally passed it on the 11th hour. We passed it at 11 p.m. on the last day of formal session, July 31st. It was tight, and we got it done. And I'm very proud of that work alongside Senator Cream, Representative Honan, Representative McGregor, and Representative Balzer, who has since retired. There were quite a few we didn't pass. In fact, do the math, there were about 15 we didn't pass. I'm happy to read the names of them, or I can leave it to you to read them in the packet. That's your call. It's your time. But I think it's worth thinking about the list of the ones that we've passed, again, in your packet, and the list of the ones that haven't passed, and try to figure out if there's a pattern. I suspect you'll figure out that there is a pattern. And I hope that you, the select board, will continue to help shepherd our town meeting to making strong decisions about when it's appropriate to file a home rule and when it is not. Last year, town meeting passed 2 new home rules to send to the legislature. One related to retired police officers being able to work details when we don't have enough police officers to work those details, so long as those retired police officers have all of their certifications up to date. And the other relates to preventing the use of second-generation anticoagulants, a particular type of rat poison that happens to have a terrible side effect on birds of prey. Those are the 2 that were passed last year. As is the custom with Senator Cream and I, we divide them up. The 2 of us look at them and figure out how to balance our workloads, balance our expertise. And because home rules are only filed in the House or the Senate, never both, we basically divide them in half. In this case, because Newton also filed a second-generation anticoagulant home rule, she went ahead and filed the Brookline one, and I filed the home rule related to retired police officers. But of those 15 home rules that didn't pass, what comes of them? And the answer is, well, it depends on how old they are. If the first time they were filed in the legislature was last session, they can be filed again. Doing that requires an action of the select board. The legislature cannot refile that home rule petition unless the select board chooses to send a letter to my office with a raised seal so that we can take it to the clerk and file that home rule petition. That prerogative is yours. You are not obligated to refile any home rule petition. It is entirely within your prerogative to decide. Home rules that have already had 2 bites of the apple at the legislature cannot be filed again without town meeting access. So a home rule that's been filed twice and has failed to become law, if folks want it to come back again, it has to be filed as a warrant article, pass town meeting, and then I will eagerly await your raised seal letter to file. And again, Senator Cream and I will decide kind of who makes sense to file it based on a variety of factors that we think through. I would add that the other three representatives, Honan, McGregor, and now Greg Schwartz, are all important partners and are always supportive of our efforts. But as I said, it's led by Senator Cream and I. You've got the letter. I'm happy to answer questions, general or about particular home rules. But I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page about what's filed now, exactly 2, how many can be refiled, quite a few more, and that it's your decision as to whether or not we should do that or not. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think for our vast TV audience, your explanation of the process was very, very helpful, very important. And I also like to thank you for the incredible work you did to get our Article 97 legislation passed. It was very, very difficult, and people went out of the way to make sure that got through.
And I didn't mention it, forgive me, I didn't mention and should have that our Lieutenant Governor, Kim Driscoll, was incredibly important to getting it done. I bent her ear and she got very excited about it. And we needed the executive branch to really be invested, and she was an incredible partner. And so I want to point that out. The Lieutenant Governor, Kim Driscoll, was really instrumental to getting it done as well.
Great. Any questions from the select board? Michael?
I'm just thinking that Representative Vitello's explanation and comment that, we filed 16 and one passed. We're certainly all ears. It would be perhaps very helpful for you to ask the moderator for time at town meeting to give that same explanation, because there are 255 town meeting members who need to hear it.
Yeah, I've given the explanation before.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Sometimes town meeting is so moved and other times not. But I would also add that by the time it's at the floor of town meeting, our community has invested hundreds of hours in it just to get it to the floor of town meeting. And the idea that a home rule petition isn't designed to be passed, but instead to send a message, seems like, I'm not so sure my colleagues are receiving the message quite that way.
Thank you.
Paul?
So Bernard, a question for you. It sounds like at some point we need to make a decision about some of them, all of them, none of them.
Ones that we can.
Sounds like it's on us.
Yeah.
Do we have thoughts about how we're going to get to the answer? Are we doing that tonight? Is that going to be another time? Tell me, when do you need this by?
Well, that's a great question. Unlike general legislation, home rules can be filed at any time. But just like all other bills, there is a series of steps necessary for them to become law. And each of those steps takes time on the calendar, but also human being time. And so what I would say is the sooner they get to me, the better chance Cindy Cream and I and our colleagues have of getting it across the finish line.
Okay, so what I would suggest, just off the top of my head, is that we each look at the list that's in our packet that Tommy provided, and identify those that are priorities for us and that we think have a chance of being successful in the legislature, and then let's discuss it.
Okay. Fair enough.
I don't want to do it right now, because I mean,
No.
that is just not going to work. Yeah, I think that if you give me or Tiffany your thoughts, by in a week or so, we'll get it on the calendar.
Okay, thank you.
John?
A couple of things. I'd like to put the emphasis on the second half of what our chair just said, have a chance to pass. I'm not an expert on that. I think Representative Vitello, you're closer to being an expert on it by far. So if you haven't already done so, I think some kind of indication of, from your perspective, someone who knows the workings of the legislature pretty well, which of the various home rule petitions that cannot be considered by the legislature unless they are refiled are ones that might actually stand a chance of passage, which ones more likely will be subsumed in a broader piece of legislation that will be statewide, just as guidance for us. The other point I'd like to make, which I hope people will sort of see that this is not in any sense meant to disrespect town meetings that adopted resolutions for legislation to be filed. But we all know that town meetings change. A town meeting from 2020 isn't the same as a town meeting from 2025. The membership is different. Issues have sort of shifted. The context has changed. One particular example I'll point out is there's a piece of legislation that would result in property being a tax being put on property transfers. But that was adopted by town meeting before we adopted the Community Preservation Act, which imposes a tax on it's just kind of a broad-based tax on our existing tax base. Does that warrant us rethinking the other piece that was filed as a home rule petition? I think it does. But I don't want to make that decision on behalf of town meeting. And so the other way to approach this is for town meeting to simply have the option of deciding which ones town meeting thinks should be refiled. I hope they wouldn't disregard the very cogent arguments you've made for trying to be selective about this. So I just want to put that out there too. I don't think it's entirely up to the select board to decide which should be refiled. It might in fact be time for town meeting to take a second look at some of these and make their own decision.
But don't we need to separate the petitions into those that have had one bite of the apple and those that have had two?
Yes.
I mean, the first category, it's our
Yeah.
responsibility, not town meetings.
Mhm.
Second category, we can, I don't know what we do, but,
Yeah.
appear at town meeting and say, hey, guys, what do you think of this stuff? Or whatever. But, it's the first category I think I really should have emphasized that where we have responsibility for deciding whether, they should go forward and then do something about it.
Well, some of these emerged from town meeting with no initiative from the select board. They were town
Correct.
meetings petitions,
Correct.
not our petitions.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some of them select board members sometimes opposed.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're talking about, Tommy, is that petitions that have come out of town meeting submitted by the select board and failed the first time and then were resubmitted. They had two bites of the apple. It's those petitions that town meeting must revote.
Right.
Yeah, so a couple of things to clarify that process. A home rule petition is, under state law, a two-step process. The legislative body, the city council or the town meeting, votes to approve. And then the executive branch has the prerogative to forward it to the legislature or not. Two keys, right? Two keys need to be turned. You're the second key. Town meeting has turned its key. And so for a home rule petition that has just passed town meeting, the select board decides to send it along or not. The two examples of that are the rodenticide and the retired police officers. The select board has decided to send those along. If a home rule petition has been sent along once and failed to become law, in order for me to file it or Senator Cream to file it a second time, we simply need the select board to send the letter. The select board does not have to. The select board has the prerogative. If a home rule petition has been submitted to the legislature and failed to become law twice in a row, then the select board doesn't have the authority without town meeting, or if we were a city council voting it again. And so if you go to Appendix A, near the back of your letter, you see possible town action in the rightmost column. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 home rule petitions that were filed for the first time last session. For Senator Cream or I to refile those, we simply need the select board to send the letter. On the other hand, you'll see in the second page of that table, the rightmost column says obtain approval in town meeting again. Those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It is not up to the select board to simply send a letter. In fact, town meeting would have to consider the item again and pass it, and then the select board could decide to send the letter or not. Right. So that's the distinction. Select board member Van Scoyoc suggested that perhaps the select board shouldn't exert its prerogative to send or not send, but maybe just if town meeting wants it, it should send it. And in fact, that's what the select board has done the past 3 or 4 years. It's not required to. The select board has the authority to decide not to send it along. When asked what passes and what doesn't pass, I think the test is, could you imagine this being statewide legislation? If so, it probably doesn't pass as a home rule. If it's unique to a community, if it's specific to a community, if it doesn't have impact on other communities, on their economy, on their transportation, if it's really unique to the one community, then it has a much better chance. But of course, the great and general court, in its infinite wisdom, can deviate from those traditions and standards, frankly, anytime it wants, as long as it's consistent with the state constitution. And so there's always a chance of an unexpected result. Select board member Van Scoyoc also suggested that sometimes a more recent town meeting might disagree with a previous version of itself. And there's an even more specific example of that comes to mind. A few terms ago, town meeting passed a home rule petition to allow 16 and 17-year-olds the right to vote in local elections. It went to the legislature twice, failed to pass twice. It was brought back to town meeting so that it could be sent to the legislature again, but that town meeting voted it down. Town meeting changed its mind on that issue, and the votes are the evidence of that. And so Select Board Member Van Scoyoc is correct. We have proof in Brookline that sometimes town meeting changes its mind over time.
Well,
So Tommy, there's a number of outcome classifications. Maybe you could educate us a little bit on the difference between study. Sometimes we know what study means here. I don't know if what study means there. There's third reading. Can you give a little insight into the probability of something coming back and passing if it was referred to study versus a third reading? Is a third reading, is it almost got to the finish line and ran out of time? Is there some clarification you could provide?
Sure. I think that for home rules in particular, there are 3 outcomes worth noting. Passed into law as amended, or anything else, right? And anything else means it's not the law. And it kind of doesn't matter for a home rule in particular, whether it made it to third reading or whether it was sent to study or if it got jammed up somewhere else. Because the home rules that didn't get to the finish line, it's not that they failed to get to the finish line because of some technical detail where, oh, the thing the town asked for isn't quite consistent with some obscure part of some other law, and we just needed to make a change and we didn't figure it out at time. We ran out of time and we're just going to file it again and we'll be fine. That's not the story for the nearly 24 home rules on this list that did not become law. That's not why they didn't become law. So I don't think it's helpful to look at how far it got along and say, oh, well, it was close, so that means the legislature liked it more. That's not really how it works at all.
Thank you. It's helpful.
okay, any further discussion? Okay, so we'll look through the list and do what we have to do. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your time. And of course, I'm available to each and all of you for questions along the way.
Thank you. Okay, next we have the main event, Washington Street Complete Streets Project. I see Commissioner Shute is at the podium. And I think is going to start us off.
Good evening. My name's Erin Jude. I'm the Commissioner of Public Works, and we are pleased to present the Washington Street Corridor preferred alternative design this evening. This project has been reviewed by the Design Review Committee at 9 public meetings and proposes a redesign of Washington Street from Beacon Street to Station Street to improve safety, accessibility, mobility for all users, including pedestrians, bicyclists, micromobility users, transit riders, public safety vehicles, and motorists. The following goals have guided the design since its inception and decision-making. That's complete streets, looking to better accommodate all users and prioritize the most vulnerable. Safety and access for pedestrians. We're looking to calm traffic, shorten crossings, which is incredibly important along Washington Street, and improve connectivity. Multimodal accommodations, providing separated bike and micromobility lanes along the entire corridor and enhancing existing bus stops. So, you know, we've spent a lot of time reviewing those concepts and trying to find balance. ADA compliance, upgrading traffic signals, sidewalks, and curb ramps to meet ADA standards. This is an incredible improvement for accessibility along this stretch. Enhanced streetscape, so protecting or improving our existing tree canopy, but also creating place, really improving the overall kind of feeling and how we welcome folks into this corridor in our 2 business districts. Emergency access, we're maintaining emergency access along the corridor, incorporating pedestrian scale lighting, and enhancing commercial vibrancy. And it's from the town team, we've been incredibly responsive to public comment, the input of the Design Review Committee and the business community. And I really appreciate the comments that we heard earlier that recognized those efforts. So this evening, we're going to talk about the summary of public meetings, evolution of the project, a recap of the January meeting, and what has changed from the start of the project to where we are now. This project has really evolved. An overview of the corridor, the schedule moving forward, and then continued public participation. And then we're open for comments and questions from the board. But before I move forward, I'd really like to recognize staff that has worked so hard and diligently on the project. We have Dan Martin, who is our sustainability transportation engineer, kind of our quiet unsung hero for all things transportation related. Amy Ingalls, our transportation administrator, who has really been a real leader and guide for this project. Thank you. Dan Murphy, our Director of Engineering and Transportation. We have Sam Downs, PE, who is online, and also Kevin Johnson, our Deputy Commissioner of Operations. From our design team, from Ty and Bond, who are really experts in navigating the Mass DOT TIP process and deliverables. Rich Benevento, who is the former owner of World Tech, and Ty and Bond purchased that company, is now a leader in that organization. And then Chris Surratt and Alan Cloutier, who will present the project this evening. I'd like to thank the Design Review Committee. They were incredibly deliberate and thoughtful in all of their input on this project, the business community, who have been very engaged. And then last but not least, Chair of the Transportation Board, Brian Kane. He has done an incredible job with an open and welcoming public process. He does an incredible job with the Transportation Board, and really want to thank you for your leadership, Chairman, on this project. So in terms of meetings, this is in your packet, but really just to reiterate.
Commissioner, can I say a few words before you get into the body of this?
Absolutely.
Give people a sense of what we're doing here. And I apologize, I need to talk directly into the mic so people can hear me online.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, they can hear you, but apparently I was not talking close
Oh,
enough to
okay.
the mic. Okay. So tonight's presentation is going to be an opportunity for the design review team and the transportation board to get comments from the select board that will be conveyed to them for tomorrow's meeting of the transportation board, who will, I assume, add their own comments and come up with a final a vote on this project that will then come back to the select board. I believe the transportation board is going to be a hearing, right? Or is that, no?
Is that a public hearing? Yeah, they'll,
Okay,
it
okay.
has full public comment.
Yeah, okay. Well, public comment and public hearing are different things. When it comes back to the select board, again, it will not be a hearing. But what we vote will go to the Mass Department of Transportation, which, as I understand, will have a hearing. So people who have their ideas and things they want to get into the public record should see that as an opportunity to do that after these steps here in Brookline. At the end of the presentation that you put in the packet, there is a statement that DPW continues to welcome public comment. And I think that that's an important statement that people should take advantage of, both in terms of sending comments, written comments to the select board, as well as at the DOT hearing. And I think that suggests that this process is still an evolving process, and within certain parameters, of course, but the concerns that people have are still subject to inclusion in the final product. And so people should take advantage of that. We on the select board do receive and read comments that we receive, and you should take advantage of that opportunity. So I just wanted to give people a sense of where we are in this process. So.
Thank
Okay.
you. And we will be back next week.
Yeah.
So just continuing on in terms of meetings held to date, we have had 2 years of public meetings, very inclusive process with the Transportation Board, the 9 meetings of the Design Review Committee that I mentioned, Select Board, many meetings with the MBTA and Mass DOT, meeting with department heads to really try to make sure that we're extending out through their relative boards and committees and staff to get all of their input. The Small Business Development Committee, we did an open house with businesses and the neighbors, a site walk, and a forum with the League of Women Voters. And just want to talk a little bit about the evolution of the project. So we've received a tremendous amount of feedback from the community, from the design review team, and we've really worked diligently to meet those project goals and also address all of these needs. And we keep coming back to balance. We're trying to balance all of these needs and really provide an incredible project and outcome for the town. This is a unique and really extraordinary opportunity for Brookline, and we're so excited to be able to deliver what is going to be a transformative project for the town. A couple examples, we've worked to narrow travel lanes to provide more space for other users, maintained as much parking as possible while still meeting the other project goals, look to accommodate the most vulnerable roadway users, and we're separating those bike lanes, incorporating traffic calming elements, safety improvements. I mentioned pedestrian scale lighting. We talk about other interventions in terms of raised crosswalks, which was feedback that we heard, rapid flashing beacons, looking at the intersection geometry, traffic signals operations, and really have worked very closely with the MBTA on their operations and optimizing those. Also want to talk about placemaking, creating a beautiful corridor and adding wayfinding and a sense of arrival at the village. This is something that we heard from the business community and have included in the project, and also adding parking and curb use analysis for Brookline Village, something that the business community asked for, and we are going to deliver on, and we think is actually both of those we think are huge improvements that are going to be great big picture for the village. January, we really kind of culminated all of the input that we had heard to date, did a sort of a recap on the conceptual alternative, the preferred concept that you'll see in a minute. Focused a bit on Washington to Holden, which is where we've spent a lot of time because that's where we kind of have it's our busiest intersection with a lot of moving parts, and making sure that we had all of those movements correct. We went over the whole corridor in order to get the vote. And then the vote was to approve the Washington Street Corridor Complete Street Project as presented, and then to forward to the Transportation Board, Select Board, and Mass DOT for advancement. And the team added the Design Review Committee added to their vote the wayfinding signage and the parking study and curb use analysis to make sure that it was very clear that it was up front and that they felt like that was important for the success of this project, and that the business community had been heard, and that we continue to put that forward. And they voted 8-2 in favor of the project. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Chris Surratt, who is going to go over the project, and then we look forward to answering your questions, and the design team and DPW team is here to answer those.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Christopher Surratt. I am from Ty and Bond. I've been working on this project as the commissioner introduced the project through the various slides. It's about a 3-year process thus far, right? From the first time I think the project was introduced in its current state to where we are today. It's about a 3-year process. And I think of some of those recap slides about what has changed really identifies and really magnifies how much of an iterative process this really is. We come up with an initial concept, we hear feedback from the town, from stakeholders, from businesses. We refine that concept, we present it again, and we do this over and over again through the design review committee process. It's really something that you would use as a template on a project like this, with so many stakeholders involved, with so many moving pieces, moving parts, and overlapping objectives. So I commend the town for taking this on, and for also navigating the process and kind of ending up in a culmination with that last DRC review committee meeting and the vote, and sort of the results that are presented here on the next section of slides that show what we've come to for a concept that we can hopefully advance to the Mass DOT process and ultimately advertising. So to go over some project limits, the project is along Washington Street. It's about 1.3 miles of Washington Street, including some of the side streets, a few hundred feet on each of the side streets. The project starts at Beacon Street, at the approach of Beacon Street, to be more specific, on Washington Street, extending down Washington Street through Brookline Village, terminating at Station Street. So I alluded to the iterative process and how the design has changed through public input. There's a lot of information on this slide. I know that you've seen the information in the packets ahead of the meeting. So just to give an overall sense of what has changed through the public process, we've broken it up into different sort of main themes, right? The first one is intersection layouts. So at Washington and Beacon Street, through the DRC review committee, we've advanced the shortening of the left turn alternative with the separated bicycle lane extending to Beacon Street. This allows for on-street parking in the eastbound direction, which is about 9 spaces. This was something that was highlighted and critical to the design in that area. Washington and Park Street, we're moving forward with a signalized intersection with the removal of the left turn lane. So it's just one single lane in each direction at Park Street. With this configuration, we have the ability for increased maneuverability for cyclists at this intersection. Moving on to Washington at School and Cypress Street, one of the marquee intersections of the corridor. We've realigned the intersection to improve bicycle and pedestrian crossings, shorten them, and sort of improve the geometric configuration of that intersection. We'll see these in color as we get through the presentation. Washington Street at Harvard, again, realigning the intersection, improving operations. Lane widths, something that's been established with stakeholders, with the MBTA, with the Design Review Committee. We've established an 11-foot travel lane standard along the corridor. That's a through lane standard, 11 feet. And then on-street parking, maximizing on-street parking. We've had about, for existing count, about 190 outdoor, 190 parking spaces plus the outdoor dining areas. When we started this process and really uncovering the proposed parking, a combination of DRC meetings 4 and 5, we had 85 parking spaces. By the time we got through the process at DRC 9, Design Review Committee 9, we had 135 proposed parking spaces along the corridor. And that is the template that you've seen tonight as part of the presentation. 135 parking spaces. Washington Street at School Street, we've relocated on-street parking to the westbound direction in front of those large residential buildings, condos, apartments. That was a key aspect of some input from the community. And then also from Washington Street, from Holden to Harvard, that last segment, we've introduced 9 parking spaces on street heading towards Brookline Village in that area through our design changes. So the next segment of slides they're cuts of moving along Washington Street from Beacon Street to Brookline Village. So I'm going to go through these slides, highlight some of the main features, but I am just going to continue. And if you have specific questions on a segment, an intersection, a driveway, we can revisit them. But I'm just going to flip through the next segment of slides here and just highlight the overall.
I don't mean to be rude, but you said you added 9 parking spaces between
yes,
Holden and Harvard.
Harvard, correct.
But didn't you take away a large number?
So I would say to clarify, we
Okay,
reintroduced.
Yeah, please be clear.
Sure.
You know, when you're making those statements, so that it's not.
So we
Pardon me?
reintroduced, we added back in, 9 parking spaces to that area heading toward the village.
Yeah.
On that point, since you gave us the number of spaces that you added back from your originally severely reduced number, can you tell us the number of spaces that are there now versus the number of spaces in the updated plan?
Can you say that one more time, please?
The number of existing spaces now, today, versus what would you have in the latest version of this plan?
So
You said 135 for the latest version of the plan.
that's correct for
How
proposal.
many are there now?
190.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions? Before we move on? Yeah. Okay. So continuing through the corridor from starting at Beacon Street, we are proposing separated bicycle lanes along each side of Washington Street. You see the 9 parking spaces at the intersection or in the vicinity of the intersection of Beacon Street heading towards the village. We are moving again from Beacon Street to Brookline Village along the corridor. Separated bicycle lanes continue. Sidewalks are at the face of the buildings on each side of Washington Street. Moving down, you can see we highlighted the driveway opening for the fire station. Across from the fire station, we hatch out an area where there is a parking, sort of no parking area for the maneuverability of the fire apparatus moving in and out of the driveway. Separated bicycle lanes continue as we advance down the corridor. Throughout the corridor, we highlight the locations of the bus stops, the proposed bus stop locations. Each of the side street crosswalks will have a high friction crosswalk treatment. And then all of the crosswalks across Washington Street will be supplemented with rectangular rapid flashing beacons.
Sorry,
Major-
what's a high friction?
It's the material. It creates more of a grit surface, so it's not as slippery. Sometimes the thermoplastic markings, when they get wet, they become slippery.
Yep.
So it's more of an abrasive material for better traction.
And in terms of longevity, because the plastic striping lasts a long time compared to painted surface.
That's correct. So it's on that magnitude of longevity, right? It's kind of, paint is wears away a lot faster, especially with the climate that we live in.
Yep.
So this is more on the magnitude of the thermoplastic markings.
All right, thank you.
I see pockets of on-street parking along Washington Street. Gardner Road, I would say one of the sort of key intersections where you look at geometric improvements, really narrowing the intersection approach, providing more space for pedestrians, for cyclists, reducing the crosswalk or the crossing times across the street just because of those curb line changes. You can see the shorter crosswalk means a pedestrian has less time exposed to vehicular traffic within the street. Again, the crosswalks across Washington Street are supported by rectangular rapid flashing beacons.
So there, you've taken out a traffic island because you've been able to reduce the
That's correct.
crossing. I'm familiar with that intersection, and I'm just wondering about, there are people who tend to cross at a diagonal, as it were, and so I don't know what possible solution there is to that, given the driveways and so forth that are there, but the curb cuts, particularly with the one that's furthest to the right.
I would say that if you're a pedestrian coming from either direction at this location, if you have the opportunity to cross with a crosswalk that's shorter distance and also supported by a rectangular rapid flashing beacon, to me as a pedestrian, that would make it, the safer route for a pedestrian in my.
I'm sure it's safer. I'm just wondering whether people will still cross diagonally, but that's on them. Okay.
That's correct.
Yeah.
You let them finish.
That's
Go
correct.
ahead.
Continuing down the corridor, again, highlighting the separated bicycle lanes along each side of Washington Street, sidewalks, back of sidewalk. You can see some of the existing tree pits that are to remain, highlighted in green. Also areas hatched or colored in green are sort of areas that we've defined as loam and seed, or it's a buffer between the roadway and the sidewalk, or roadway and the separated bicycle lane. As we advance this design, some of these larger areas will become a landscaped area, areas for tree plantings. We're not there yet, but that, again, opportunity for streetscape and tree plantings along Washington Street. Moving towards the Park Street intersection, as we mentioned, the preferred alternative, conceptual alternative, includes one lane in each direction at the signalized intersection. If I go to the next slide, you'll see, actually, I'll go back. Park Street, that's just cut off on the page, but we have a do not block the box striped on Park Street, just off the page. This is an indication for motorists to stay out of that area to allow for turning vehicles to still use the intersection. Again, it comes down to the behavior of the motorists, if they abide by that or not, but we do include a do not block the box at that location. We have suggested ADA accessible spaces along the corridor based on existing locations, based on feedback received thus far. So we do have suggested locations. There's one here between Griggs Terrace and Park Street. But we do have them closer to Beacon Street. We have them in Brookline Village. We have them in front of sort of the municipal building segment where we are right now. So we do show those spots based on the information we've received thus far.
Brenna, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So, thank you. So when I see that there's a handicap marker here,
Yes.
or I think in a prior slide, there might have been an LZ.
Yes.
Do we still have the flexibility to move those around and add more?
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is not,
No, this is just us looking at what's out there, looking for gaps, like longer gaps of where the spaces are today.
okay,
And where we're suggested locations, because also you have to look at proximity to things like crosswalks and what are the surrounding uses of the buildings, of the property. So this is our suggested locations, but again,
could be changed.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Weybridge Road is another great example of sort of reallocating the space, reclaiming some green space, wider intersection, the ability to realign some of the curb corners and realign the intersection. It's from a safety perspective, you're reducing crosswalks, you're creating a better line of sight for vehicles by coming in a closer to 90-degree angle, but you're also getting space that can be used for streetscape, can be used for hardscape items, bike racks, or a rain garden, right? So you're gaining space back that was, as of right now is asphalt. So again, another great opportunity for streetscape elements or pedestrian elements as we move forward.
So, one other thing,
Mike, don't just speak out.
I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Bernard. You were looking the other way, so I thought, oh, I'll give it a shot. You mentioned that.
Just try to keep control here.
Yep. There are currently 190 spaces and there'd be 135 left, so there are 55 spaces along the entire corridor being taken out. But I see a lot of spaces along Washington Street, on that slide and elsewhere. And the sense that I have is that most of the spaces that are being taken out, because there's right now continuous parking there, are in that section where there is no commercial. Is that a fair statement?
I would say no. It's intertwined, right? There are different pockets of spaces being removed. It's not, I would say, no, it's not just all commercial or all residential. I would say that it's in various pockets along the corridor.
Okay.
Okay. And then really getting into one of the major intersections. This is in the vicinity of the School Street and Cypress Street location. Again, this is one of the areas that when we said major changes that from community input is we moved the parking from slide bottom to slide top in front of the residential buildings. So we realigned our design in front along Washington Street to make sure that that on-street parking was against sort of planned, I would say westbound, to be in line with the needs of those abutting buildings. So that was a major change for this area. You can see the separated bicycle lanes continue to the intersection. And then the next slide shows what it looks like today, right? So there's a major difference. I tried to make a comparison of what it looks like today versus what we have on our preferred alternative on the next slide. So that's what it looks like today. And this is what we go to as our preferred alternative. You can see the major improvement for pedestrian and cyclists. It's a simplified movements for each of the modes of transportation, shorter crossings. I would say the two intersection approach, it eliminates a lane shift from School Street to Cypress Street. There's a lane shift there now. It removes the slip lanes that create a safety concern for pedestrians utilizing crosswalks and also vehicles in the same regard. So this is a much simpler, much safer intersection configuration compared to what's out there today. And you do gain, look on the Cypress Street, School Street intersection, you gain that corner of placemaking, right? So that again is an area, it's a canvas for us if we want to use it as green infrastructure, streetscape, dining. There's an opportunity there to use that space for the town that we are creating based on the realignment of these two intersections or this intersection. Getting towards I call it the municipal building segment.
Sorry, I just want to say, of all of the geometry changes here, that one is, I think perhaps one of the best.
Yes.
As a cyclist coming down Washington Street, going towards Brookline Village and then turning into School Street, you really you're sort of out in a very exposed position for a long.
You're very vulnerable. Yes, absolutely.
And the way you've reconfigured this is safer, and it seems to me it'll reduce accidents, vehicular accidents as well. There'll be much less confusion at that intersection.
Yes, absolutely. So in this segment, you can see here we have parking on both sides of Washington Street. Separated bicycle lanes continue along the corridor. We do have curb extensions. We'll highlight curb extensions here. When we use curb extensions, it gives us an opportunity to define parking areas. It helps with reducing crosswalk distances for a crosswalk across the side street or the major street. So we do highlight, most of the intersections do have curb extensions for that reason. Continuing on, this is at Holden Street. Again, you could see some of the suggested locations for ADA accessible spaces. I think this is the current configuration, as there's a few ADA spots here that we're looking to implement in our preferred alternative. And the next slide, this really gets into Brookline Village. The first segment here is from Holden Street to Brookline Village. We do have the parking spaces on the eastbound approach with the 2 suggested loading zone spaces at the end there. Those spaces are strategically placed based on the ability to load goods and using that driveway and or crosswalk. Because, you know, if you're using a loading zone, you have to have the ability to get the goods onto the sidewalk. So that's something to think about, and also the ability for the delivery vehicle to make their way to the curb line to not obstruct traffic in this location.
Can I make a comment here?
Yes.
You've taken out parking on the north side of Washington Street, and on the that one block of Harvard Street, there's no parking. We lose parking on the Harvard Street below Kent Street. And the businesses in that area are the type of businesses where you run in, grab something and run out, or run into a bank and make a deposit and run out. I mean, it seems to me that it's really undermining those types of businesses to not have, you know, those parking spaces. I mean, I use it, not a lot, but occasionally. On the south side of Washington, those spaces are always filled, but there are spaces occasionally on the north side. I mean, have you given any thought to that? I mean, the business community is a variety of types of businesses, and you know, it's the difference between a restaurant and, let's say, Starbucks or a bank. And I don't really get the sense that that was taken into consideration there.
So through the design review process, we looked at a whole host of different iterations. We looked at parking on the north side, at the south side. At one point, when the lanes were wider, there wasn't parking on either side. We talked about ADA, we talked about loading, heard a lot of feedback from the different businesses on kind of their busy times. Heard a lot also about current practices for deliveries, which is right in the middle of the street typically. And if you drive that route, you've probably seen that as well and had to move around one of those box trucks. So the design review committee looked at all of those different iterations, listened to the business community. And this is why we really think that parking utilization and curb use analysis is really important. And so that we'll be able to look at the whole area. And generally, when people are coming to a commercial area, they want to know that they can find parking someplace and where it is. And so in this case, in terms of finding the right balance, the committee looked at all of those options and wanted to make sure that they were meeting all of the different goals that have been established and outlined for the board. But you know, we're confident that with this parking analysis and study, wayfinding, that we are going to really improve understanding access and utilization of parking in the village overall. So I think my answer to you is it was studied by the design review committee, and ultimately they're recommending this alternative.
It's complex and there's no perfect answer, but I wanted to raise that, you know, problem that I saw that. Yeah, Mike. Well, let me finish.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. I'm touching. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm finished. Go ahead.
All right. So I think it's also it's important to remember that some of the cyclists who come through here, and there will be more bicyclists because it will feel a lot safer, will be customers. The last time I went to Serenade Chocolate was on a bicycle. Every time I go into a store and I'm on a bike, I actually mention it to the people there, because I want them to understand that it's not just motorists who provide business. It's everybody who comes by pedestrians,
I'm not
cyclists.
sure what the point, the relevance of that is.
Well, the relevance is that when you're taking away parking spaces, you're making it possible for more access by others.
And you're assuming those others are gonna do the same thing.
Some
with
will,
parking.
some not,
Yeah,
some will.
Okay,
yeah, some
I'm
will.
not sure that, any rate. Paul.
Thank you, Bernard. This is it okay? I just want to
Yeah.
speak to this slide because this, Mike had said that, you know, the last intersection was like almost worth the money.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about this.
Yeah.
I lived in Brookline Village before I moved down to St. Mary's, and, you know, this is a hazardous place to walk around. And the reconfiguration here is really, really important, especially what's happening with coming down Kent Street and how you're coming into the intersection is really key. There's a much better flow here, and I believe it's actually going to reduce light cycling and timing, and so hopefully it's going to improve the traffic flow. But I just want to comment briefly on the importance of this Brookline Village traffic and curb study. It really is very important. And the reason why is I frequent Brookline Village. I have most of my meetings with Tommy Vitolo in Brookline Village and other people, and I don't always walk because I don't have time, so I do drive. And when I come into the village, I can usually find a spot to park, but I see many spaces that are going unutilized, and it's because they have dedicated for permit parking on Kent Street, but it's not being used. If you go into the Kent Street lot, you can often see that, you know, 2/3 of the EV parking spaces are empty. I understand the policies are you have to be charging in order to park there. And for the spaces that are on Harvard Street or on Washington Street, they don't turn quick. People are parking for almost the maximum 2 hours. I spent quite a bit of time speaking to many of the businesses in Brookline Village. I took a day to do that. And the feedback was these spaces are never available because they're almost consumed by 2-hour parkers. So it's not turning quick. So I'm excited I'm hopeful and pleased that Commissioner Shute has committed to a parking and curb study for this area. But as important, I believe they've also committed to creating an advisory group of residents and abutting businesses to help provide input. So it's not just a data collection effort, it's actually a qualitative type of conversation as well. And frankly, I would hope that we would do the same for Washington Square because they have the same types of issues, the same types of concerns, and I think that would be very helpful.
Okay.
Sure. May I
Tell us what-
respond? Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Select Board. Warren, Brian Kay and I have the honor to chair the Transportation Board and work with these great people. I live at 4 Lincoln Road. And just to follow up on what Paul said, we are absolutely 100% committed to doing a parking and wayfinding study, not just in Brookline Village, but in Washington Square. It will not be necessarily done by the same people. There'll have to be a procurement. There's going to be a whole process. But yes, we will absolutely 100% do that because it's really, really important. I'm also personally committed to figuring out how we can get people to park at the Driscoll School and at the Pierce School after 4 p.m. on weekends and during the summer. Because people have told us it's important. And if we've done anything through this DRC process, it's listen. We have listened intently and made change after change after change because we understand that it's important to people. So we are committed to that, and I thank you for bringing it up.
Great, thank you.
So moving on from Holden to Harvard, we look at the existing condition on that next stretch, right? Really getting into the commercial area along Washington Street, say from Harvard Street to our limit of work at Station Street. This is a recent aerial image of what the existing condition looks like. And then we get to sort of what the reconfiguration, what the geometric changes are of the actual intersection. So we're realigning the intersection. We are relocating the open space, Hickey Triangle, from the northern corner to the southwestern corner. And part of this, the Davis Avenue and Andon Place approaches are under stop control. One of the design updates or design changes is removing the crosswalk near Davis Avenue We have crosswalks proposed at Kent Street, which is 120 feet away, and at Station Street, which is 190 feet away. So you have two crosswalks on each side, one on each side of the Davis Street crosswalk that we are not showing as part of this configuration. Benefits: it improves intersection operation, it simplifies pedestrian movements. Traffic on Kent Street can travel straight through onto Washington Street, and it provides opportunities for placemaking in this area, specifically that reclaimed corner opposite of Hickey Triangle where it presently is. The drawback is we do show a left turn. It does require a left turn restriction from Davis Avenue. So that is a restriction. It is a right turn only out of Davis Avenue approaching Washington Street.
Mike?
What happens to on-street or outdoor dining spaces that are currently allocated some parking spaces? Presumably that's no longer feasible, is that correct?
So in the area between Holden and Harvard?
Well, generally speaking, in the village, yeah.
So within the village itself, I mean, we have our proposed option here. We do carry the separated bicycle lanes through Washington Street to the limit of work.
Right.
And I think we have the opportunity for placemaking and sort of streetscape amenities at that corner, but we don't specifically call out outdoor dining spaces within the stretch of Washington Street, as you see on the screen.
So, but there are, with these changes in geometry on the south side here, and similarly at the corner of Cypress, there's also, you've added some space that could
Yeah,
be.
I would say that we've added space.
Yep.
I would say that right now we just consider it sort of a canvas. We don't specifically call it outdoor dining or streetscape or rain gardens. It's space for us to use as part of the project.
Okay.
Okay, Paul?
I'm all set, Bernard. Thank you.
David?
Regarding these placemaking spaces, have you looked at sun exposure on them? Would these areas actually be utilized realistically?
I would say not at this point. I mean, we're really looking at intersection geometry and traffic operations, pedestrian movements, cyclist amenities, the cyclist network. When we get to landscaping and streetscaping, that will be something that will be of part of the scope.
And you mentioned sorry.
No, go ahead.
You mentioned cyclist amenities, but getting back to Mike Sandman's question regarding outdoor dining, would the configuration completely render it impossible to have outdoor dining in some of the current spaces?
So I'm going to do a couple things. One is the team includes, the design team includes Halverson Design, who we've added to the team that is landscape architects. And so they are looking at all of the sort of the sun exposure, what we have for the amount of green space, what that canvas is. And so they're going to help us kind of come up with what is viable, what's going to survive, how we're going to maintain it through the corridor. So we do have a team in place for that. In terms of the outdoor dining, I believe there's some space for sidewalk, cafe table around cafe tables. So not, the sort of in-road parking space locations that there currently is by the Blossom Bar and the Turkish restaurant, but that there is room for cafe style tables should they want to apply for those.
What about further toward Washington Square, like Washington Square Tavern, for instance, has outdoor dining? Would that be able to stay in place?
At the intersection of Beacon Street?
That was included?
Yes.
No? Okay.
There, Amy Ingles, Transportation Administrator. No, the location by the Washington Square Tavern will not be able to be maintained because the bike lane would basically be between it and the sidewalk. And we decided that would be a hazard for, people to be coming across the bike lane from the outdoor dining to the restaurant and back.
So you're deciding that's a hazard, but is the physical layout, does it make it possible to do outdoor dining? Are there examples in
So-
other communities where people cross through a bike lane to get to outdoor dining?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things we looked at when we were discussing this, is if there are any examples. I can think of one that's now no longer in place in Boston, just outside of the Brookline border, actually, but there weren't any others. They're all, basically, the bike lane would be switched to the other side of, in the street, basically, and protected by the barrier, but that's not the way that this design is created. So there just wasn't really space to have both in this case.
I would also just note that under the revised outdoor dining regulations, that structure is coming down anyway, the current structure there, because of the year-round restrictions. So that's not going to exist regardless, and we're going to work with them to come up with another strategy there. But the permanent structure there has to come down.
Okay.
When
Paul?
road work is to take place there.
So I just wanted to point out something on this corner over here, I guess the bottom left. That actually is a bit different than it's out there right now, although it generally looks about the same. That is really tight right now. That sidewalk, if you're out there, there's not a whole lot of space between really the building and the curbing right now. So this does bump it out quite a bit from what's out there right now on the corner. So whether or not, they try to put something really small up against a building or something, may or may not be possible, because again, we're making it bigger. So there might be, I guess, a little bit more room, but I don't know if there's going to be that much room to really support something like that. But I just kind of wanted to point out that corner over there is actually going to be larger than it's out there right now, or the space dedicated to pedestrians.
Paul, yeah.
No, I'm all set, Bernard. Thank you.
Can I ask a question regarding, has there been any assessment of the usage of these outdoor dining spaces? I mean, are they widely used? And when we take them away, are we really impacting those businesses or not?
It's a great question.
So we did, the planning team actually did a lot of that work when we revised the outdoor dining regulations, and we came to you. We talked to the businesses about how they are used and so forth. And one of the things that we're going to get additional information from prior to this process moving from design to construction is how have the alterations in fees impacted the use? Right now, the barrier to entry that we were told was the number one was the fees were too high. And that we need to look at it more as a subsidy as opposed to truly passing along the cost of outdoor dining to the restaurants. So now that the fees have been reduced, and we've eliminated year-round outdoor dining, there's going to be a change in incentive structure for this. So some businesses that may have, for example, removed their outdoor dining, like the Italian restaurant on Harvard or Martin's coffee shop there, they may have an incentive to try and return to it now that the fees are lower, or they may not. So we're going to need to gather more information with the revised structure of outdoor dining to really see what the impacts there are before. But again, that's something that's happening now while design is still in progress. So we'll have that information as we approach design milestones.
Okay, Paul?
Yeah, and I just wanted to point out that many of the establishments that have outdoor dining they only use it for dinner, right? Many of these places aren't open for lunch. If you go up to Washington Square, there's a couple of restaurants that have fixed outdoor dining structures that are taking up at least 5 parking spaces that aren't being used right now. That means that other establishments can't use the parking space to service their customers. And at least 2 of the establishments up there aren't open for lunch. And so the parking's not available throughout the day to go visit and pop in the way that you mentioned that some of these other businesses have. So I support the outdoor dining. I think it's been helpful, but I think we really need to think about where and when and how it impacts, because you can only do so many things on the public way. Can't squeeze everything in.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I might,
Yes,
Brian Kane, the DRC spent a lot of time talking about outdoor dining. Obviously, we all experienced COVID and went through it and realized how wonderful it was. And for a few years there, I spent every Friday morning at Martin's for about 3 years in a row. So I'm definitely an outdoor dining aficionado. We came down on the side of the fact that the public way is the public way. It is subject to license by the select board. And should a private establishment choose to want to take over that land, it's up to the select board to allow that or not, because you are the chief executive of the town. We did not go into any of this thinking that any particular establishment had quote unquote the right to any particular area, because your regulations that you've put out there make it very clear that it has to be open to everybody, and that was very important to us. We did try to make as much space available for outdoor dining as possible, and I will note here that there's a bike lane potentially between the parking and the Washington Square Tavern, which, by the way, has been up there for years now. Despite we're told that parking is the most important thing in the world. There's been 2 spots right in front, which we're also told is the most important thing in the world for years. Clearly, that both can't be true. We will try to figure out how to do outdoor dining with this. It does work in other parts of the world. Anyone who's been to Rome could tell you that the outdoor dining experience there is quite unique, and there's a lot going on around it. We will make this work. I am very confident that once we get this in the ground and get it running and live with it and figure it all out, the select board will put together the right set of policies to encourage outdoor dining and make it work in Brookline as it does, and it's a great thing. Thanks.
Are they done?
Pardon me?
I can't tell if they're done.
Well, he was done talking. Maybe they're continuing the presentation.
We have a couple more topics.
I thought,
Yeah,
Couple more topics to go through.
yeah.
Okay, so the last section of Washington Street, as we approach our limit of work at Station Street, and really how we tie into the limit of work at Station Street, and then when we get to Route 9, and then ultimately to the Emerald Necklace. So we really want to show how this project connects to Route 9 into the Emerald Necklace as we move along on our slides. But this last section, we are retaining parking on the opposite side of the post office. We do show an ADA accessible space and sidewalk separated bicycle lanes on each side. We retain the space, the ADA space at the post office on Station Street. Our separated bicycle lane terminates at the limit of work and ties into the bus pilot pavement markings that are currently out there today. From a larger perspective, I would say from a corridor perspective, let's see if I can move me out of the way. I couldn't see it on my screen. So to see the summary of the existing spaces and proposed spaces for the corridor, we broke it down into distinct segments. So the first one, from Beacon Street to Park Street, there was 88 existing parking spaces, and we are proposing 59. From Park Street to Cypress Street, existing, there's 27, and we are proposing 20. And then from Cypress Street to Station Street, there's 85 or 77 plus outdoor dining, and we are proposing 56. So that is the breakdown of our parking of what's out there today versus what is included as part of our preferred conceptual design. And moving on to the connection between our project and Gateway East and ultimately the Emerald Necklace, you could see here Route 9 from Washington Street to the Shared Use Path will carry the improvements along Route 9 into Brookline Village. So you have that continuation of your bicycle facilities, your new sidewalks, and ultimately it will be a complete pedestrian network from Route 9 to the village and connecting to the Emerald Necklace. You can see here at the edge of our screen. The next few slides here are some perspective renderings of what the corridor and specifically what the intersection or Hickey Triangle looks like today. As you can see here, this is a bird's eye view rendering. The Halverson design group helped us put together of what it looks like today, and then the same perspective, what the intersection will look like under our preferred alternative. You can see here, it really highlights that new space that's created. It highlights the crosswalks, green space, the separated bicycle lanes, the shorter crosswalk distances, and ultimately the complete street nature that we are looking to propose as part of this project in this area. And the last perspective is it's a rendering, it's a concept, but our landscape architecture group helped put this together, showing what the curb extensions would look like with low plantings, the sidewalk level separated bicycle lanes, the pedestrian crosswalk, the wayfinding signage. Really, it paints a picture of what this project will or could look like in its final condition within Brookline Village. So schedule moving forward, we have our transportation board meeting tomorrow night, February 5th. We're back here with the select board meeting February 11th. And then the Mass DOT 25% design public hearing, that is conducted after we submit the 25% design, and that date is to be determined. To move forward, we are approvals from the design review committee and transportation board, and then we advance to the 25% design with Mass DOT for review and approval. That's our first big milestone with Mass DOT, is the 25% design and ultimately the design public hearing. And continue public participation. We continue to welcome public comment, upcoming meetings, including the Transportation Board and the Mass DOT Design Public Hearing. We do have our dedicated project website and email address you can see here on the screen. Thank you.
Mike?
Could you go back to the street perspectives, the proposed condition for right in the heart of the village where Washington Street and Harvard? Thank you. And I have a question for Brian. Looking at that, sorry, Brian. Looking at that, or Amy for that matter, that looks to me like an ideal place to have an all-way pedestrian crossing phase. So that you don't have to have multiple phases, and again, that's a place where a lot of people are going to cross diagonally.
So we plan on doing that, Mike. So great minds think alike. And this is going to go through a year's work review by the DOT folks at the district level and at the state level. And they're going to really work on all of those really important details to figure out what the phasing should be. And not only that, but what the timing should be. So by the time we get here in 28, 29, I think we'll have that stuff all figured out. But that is certainly our plan right now.
Okay.
Well,
Brian, don't go anywhere. So thank you.
My pleasure.
Didn't mean to give you a command. Have you given any thought to what the future looks like with a dedicated bus lane, meaning the pilot that we've been wrestling with in this future state? Are these things compatible, or do we need to be maybe rethinking the outcome of that pilot?
So we've tried to design this concept, and right now it's a concept to fit in with the Pierce School redesign, School Street, with the bus lane pilot, and with all of the other stuff that's going on, including the bridle path. There's a lot going on in this corridor, and we've tried to design it so that nothing is excluded or necessarily included, but everything could theoretically work together based on what the engineers tell us. With respect to the bus pilot, we have received the first set of reports from the MBTA. We received those at our last meeting, and we expect to continue to receive those. I also do want to note that there have been a few projects, bus lane projects, that have been rescinded in the region, and that is certainly something that is not outside the realm of possibility. So we are eyes wide open that what works best for all of Brookline and all of this corridor, not just for any particular one project or another.
Okay, thank you.
Have you has anyone given any thought to the question of types of bicycles? Right. I mean, they're the regular bikes that we think about.
Yeah.
They're the pedal assist bikes.
Yes.
And then they're the, I think they're called throttles, right, which are like motorcycles. And I wouldn't want the latter on the bike path.
Agreed.
For example.
Agreed. So, Mr. Chairman, yes, the answer is yes. We spent a lot of time discussing that topic at the DRC. Mike, I heard what you said earlier about delivery regulation. I completely agree. I think that's something that we need to look at as a town. I think it might make sense to let Boston sort of take the lead on it because they have a lot more resources than we do, but yes. And with respect to that, a lot of that will have to do with state regulation. The Transportation Committee and the legislature has been kicking around a few bills on this for a couple of years, including some that were refiled about a month ago for the next 2-year session. That will really dictate what is and is not allowed in these lanes. I'm not sure we have the jurisdiction as a community to do something that's contrary to state law or different from
Yeah.
state law. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. But I completely agree with you that the throttle and the little Vespa things, speaking of Rome, should not be in these lanes. It's completely inappropriate. This is for pedal and slow moving things, if you ask me.
Yeah.
But we have to work with our legislative delegation. Rep. Vitola was here earlier to figure that out as a Commonwealth, and especially to figure out what works best here.
Well,
I just have one, I want to, there was a slide somewhere where you summarized the number of existing spaces in dining, and then the number of spaces with the new design. Oh, is it here? So I just want to check my math and my logic here. So there's 200 existing parking spaces, right?
Yeah, so
Approximately-
there's a reason why we put both
Let
numbers.
me- so
10 spaces are currently being used for dining right
Okay,
now.
but I'm just saying, I'm just saying it's real estate. There's
Got it.
there's 200 spaces dedicated to automobiles today.
Correct.
Or some of those get converted for dining, but if we didn't have outdoor dining, because that could go away, they are in fact parking spaces for
Correct.
autos. Okay. The proposed plan has 135 such spaces dedicated for automobiles or perhaps outdoor dining, but it has to be for autos first, and then you could take it over for outdoor dining. That's a 32% reduction in the storage of automobiles. And from that, and I'm just thinking about balance here, we're reducing auto storage by 32%. We're getting 100% dedicated for safe cycling in the corridor. We're getting vast improvements of safe pedestrian, walking and crossing. And we're getting a ton of placemaking areas. Boy, that sounds like that sounds like a pretty good balance to me. Just thinking of the overall numbers. Now, I don't discount at all what we heard from the Washington Square businesses. They have a lot of concerns. We heard similar concerns from Brookline Village. I think we need to take those concerns seriously, listen very hard, execute on our commitment to have parking studies in both of those areas, execute on our commitments to have wayfinding design into the project, execute on our commitments that we will be sure to have advisory groups from both of those community areas. Don't combine them. They're separate. They have distinct issues that they need to deal with, and execute on those. And I think it was Liz Linder said something earlier at the beginning of the night that I think I want to reiterate because I think it's important. She said we have to pay attention and be very, very diligent in communicating and coordinating with the community, especially the businesses, as we're doing the construction, because the disruption that construction can cause, you lose a couple of days, even a day of revenue in a small business, it's harmful. It can be very, very damaging. And we know that when I've experienced this in St. Mary's when there was a lot of reconstruction happening. I think that issue, we haven't talked enough about it, but transitioning to the future state, the construction aspect is critical. We're hearing a lot of complaints about the utility work that's going on in Brookline Village right now, right? It's very, very disruptive. And small businesses can't last long if they lose revenue for any period of time. So I'm hoping that we can get much better at our ability to communicate, coordinate with our businesses and our partners.
we got it.
Thank you.
Mike. Oh, I'm sorry. Do you have your hand up?
Well, yeah, I did. I wanted to respond to Paul's comment about the balance. I think I've said this before here, but I'll say it one more time. Maybe I won't say it again, but maybe I will. That we already have a pedestrian lane, dedicated pedestrian lanes. They're called sidewalks. And what we're talking about here is adding bike lanes that are separated. And we recognized a long time ago that the pedestrian safety is greatly enhanced by having a sidewalk instead of having people walk on the street. And the same thing is true of cyclists. And so there's no question that there is a loss of parking and a loss of sort of speed, a loss of velocity for vehicles when you narrow the lanes and so forth. But again, it's a balance, it's a trade-off, and it's something that we are finally coming around to recognize is a proper balance.
Mr. Chairman, if
Okay,
I may.
yes, go ahead.
So just to respond to sort of both, in addition to everything that was named as to what we get, we also get $30 million that we do not have. And let's not forget, $30 million is a lot of money. And we don't have it in this town right now because we're leveraged, and we're really, really leveraged. And I don't need to tell you folks that. In order to get that money, we have to submit a project that will score well, because there's 98 other communities in this district that are also seeking this money. And if we don't submit a project that scores well by doing things like adding the bike lanes that were mentioned, slowing down traffic, this is primarily a safety project. I want to be very clear about this. This is not a bike project. This is about slowing down cars. I see cars whipping down Washington Street every day. I walk my dog on it every day. Drives me insane. We got to slow down cars. The best way to do that, all the research tells us, is to narrow the lanes. This is also a placemaking project, as was mentioned, and it's also an opportunity to really make this much safer for everybody. We had folks from the senior center on our committee talking about this. We had folks from the pedestrian committee on our DRC talking about this. First and foremost, this project, if it's implemented, if we win the funding, will make it much, much safer. With respect to construction management, absolutely 100%, Paul, I agree. And part of the scoring that will go through the DOT process, both at the district and the state level, includes your construction management plans. And as we get closer to 50, 75, 85, 95% design, all of those initiatives will have to kick in, and they all will. They're all going to be sequenced to ensure that we can mitigate as much of the disruption as possible.
Speaking of the funding, is the federal funding in the state's bank account at this point?
Good question.
I mean, Mr. Chairman, if you know the answer to that, I'd like to get some lottery numbers for him. Yeah. So funding is definitely secure through 2026. There is a federal authorization to let that happen. It's called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. What happens after 2026 is subject to congressional approval. However, there have been transportation authorization acts going back 80 years at this point. So it's pretty well set that we think that will happen. We've heard from the new Secretary of Transportation that he does want to continue to fund state projects, especially those that help safety. And he also wants to help people have higher birth rates, which is kind of strange. But anyway.
Have high what?
Higher birth rates, states with higher birth rates. Weird. But anyway, weird. But I am confident that we will have the money. I can tell you in my day job, we work on this all the time. There is definitely a sense that there will continue to be federal support for these things.
John.
I'm going to just request indulgence of the other members of the board and also the audience. May I have 7 minutes? I've not said I've not said a word, and I prepared my comments and I timed them, and I think I'm going to be I think I'm going to be the only member of the board who's going to actually insist that that at least one aspect of this plan be changed. And if it isn't, it isn't, and I won't vote for it. But I need to explain that to the public,
go
if
ahead.
I may.
Wait, should we take you really want to break?
7 minutes isn't that long. I've heard people, spontaneously take 7 minutes tonight.
Just checking. Okay, go ahead.
Whatever. All right, here we go. And before getting into my reasons for requesting changes to one very short portion of the most recent of the Washington Street plans, I wish to share my appreciation for the work of the transportation staff, the consultants, and the design review committee. They put in many hours with good results overall. By the way, I want to thank David Krupp. I want to thank the bicycle advocates in Brookline. And I want to say, so that people will not misunderstand me, David, if you got your petition with you, bring it to me after the meeting. I'll sign it. I'm for protected bike lanes. The criticisms I'm going to raise tonight have to do with feasibility everywhere. And I'll get into those right now. Here's where I think the latest version of the plan goes wrong. Once again, I'm referring only to the short block and a half from where Harvard Street and Washington Street converge as far as Station Street. It's a very important block and a half because of the businesses that thrive there, such as the post office, Serenade Chocolates, Garrison House, Boca Grande, Mike's Barbershop, Mahayana Yom, Cadeau, Golden Chickpea, just to name a few. In that very short block, as I see it, the better option for serving the needs of businesses and their customers and pedestrians and people arriving by car and bicyclists is to continue the current arrangement of sidewalks, tree spaces, curbside parking spaces, bike lanes designated by painting, and finally, the existing car travel lanes. Certainly, the sidewalks could be upgraded and the planted areas beautified, and they should be. The markings designating parking spots and bike lanes could be made with maximum visibility and maintained that way. Intersections can be improved with greater attention to sight lines for bicyclists, pedestrians, and drivers of cars. All of that is good. Signalization can be adjusted to make it more visible and responsive to changing traffic patterns. Again, all good. And all of those improvements can be made without requiring the loss of curbside parking where it currently exists, and without substituting a cycle track for the existing designated cycle lane. If the current basic design is left as is for the very short but vital block and a half of commercial businesses, we could avoid if it's kept as it is, we will avoid a host of risks and unknowns. What are the risks and unknowns under this plan? There are risks to pedestrians. We are actually combining and pushing together a bike cycle track and a pedestrian sidewalk in an area where people are going to be going in and out of storefronts. We don't know, because we don't have that yet in Brookline, whether that's going to actually increase risks. I think it is. That seems common sense to me, but we'll see. Another unknown, risks to persons getting out of parked cars. I would argue the current arrangement whereby the parked cars, such as will remain, and there are 6 that will remain, but currently they have to their left a bike lane in the street. Most often that bike lane doesn't have bikes passing by. It's a very convenient and safe way to get out of your car to step into the bike lane. Without that bike lane there, people getting out of their cars are going to be stepping into car traffic, and not just any car traffic on lanes that are narrower. So the car traffic is going to be squeezed together more with people getting out of cars and stepping into it. I don't see how that is anything but less safe. And there will be risks to bicyclists. Yes, there are risks to bicyclists. On more than one occasion, and it actually happened tonight, people referenced fast-moving electric bikes, whatever, and to allay concerns, said, oh, well, they won't use the cycle track. They will probably be regulated to have to continue to go into the street. Well, the street that they're going to go into now doesn't have a painted bike lane, and it has narrower lanes for the cars. So we're actually sending those people, whether you like them or not, including, let's say, food delivery people on small bikes. Are they going to use the cycle track? I doubt it. There was at least one avid cyclist at the meeting last week who said he doesn't think a lot of avid cyclists will use the cycle track because it's going to have slow-moving bikes in it. And so the avid cyclists are now going to continue to use the street, some of them, and it'll be less safe in that street because there won't be a painted bike lane and there'll be tighter traffic. So those are sort of known, but not absolutely quantified risks. And yet, here's the big one: risks to the existing businesses on both sides of the block. Don't take my word for it. Take the word of Ailish Gilligan, chair of the Small Business Development Committee, who spoke earlier in this meeting on behalf of the many business owners and operators who have protested the elimination of better than half the curbside parking spaces on Washington Street in the heart of the village. Take the word of 2 business community representatives who serve on the Design Review Committee. Both of them voted against the latest version of the Washington Street project. take the word of the Brookline Chamber of Commerce. And finally, I wish to point out what I regard as the greatest shortcoming of the most recent version of the Washington Street project. And that is, ironically, it doesn't go far enough. And let me explain, in this case, Tiffany's going to sort of help me with a few slides. And so let's start with slide number 1. There are data as to the actual incidence of car on bike crashes in Brookline. We hear it referred to often as a very dangerous section of street because of the risks to bicyclists from crashes involving cars. But if you actually go to the data, and thankfully, one of the local cyclists went to the police department data and shared it with me. And the pinpoints that you see, not the identifying stores and restaurants and so on, but the pinpoints that you see are the actual evidence of a reported car on bike crash, reported to the police in the records of the police and identified by latitude and longitude. And this is the sort of beginning section of street that I'm talking about. And so you have one car on bike crash at an intersection there, you'll see with Andham Place. And then mid-block, the blue pinpoint, again, ignore the pinpoints that have identifying markers for the store or restaurant or whatever that they represent. But that red pinpoint in the middle of the, what was referred to as sort of Hickey Triangle area, that's a car on bike crash. The blue one in the middle of the block is a car on bike crash, and we go to number 2, further down. And so again, at an intersection, you have 2 car on bike crashes. And then we go, and we have, excuse me, at the Station Street intersection. Then at White Place intersection, you have 1. And then you move further on down. And now you're all of a sudden into the part of that section of Brookline Village commercial area. You're going to go to the next one, Tiffany? Mm-hmm. You are. Okay, there you go. And here's where the numbers start to bump up a little bit for the car on bike crashes. There's 1 there that's identified as being at Netta. I mean, that's just the latitude, longitude. There are 2 in the middle of the intersection, and then 1 that was identified as being more or less at the fire station. None of these incidents are addressed by the plan that's before us because the plan just stops when it gets to Station Street. I don't have any quarrel with that, but it makes me keep coming back to the point that if there is any improved safety to the people who use the cycle track versus the existing cycle lane in that part of the village, what happens when the cycle track just ends? It's a transition into a dangerous intersection where there have been 4 incidents of car on cycle crashes, nothing there to help them. And then the final slide is car on pedestrian incidents. So we got pedestrians. This is the largest number of pinpoints, and nothing there to protect them either. And then finally, there's a slide that kind of shows you what that intersection looks like today from the vantage point of the fire station, and there it is. And so you're looking at what the bicyclist has to protect him or herself. Once they complete that 1.5 block long stretch of cycle track in the heart of the village commercial area, and they transition immediately to a painted bike lane with a bus lane to one side, car lane, which will inevitably include trucks like the one you see, to the right side, another lane to the left side. That doesn't look safe to me. I don't know if it looks safe to the people who designed what's in the heart of the village and is part of the Washington Complete Streets Plan, but transitions are really important. We've sadly had a couple of bike fatalities in Cambridge, and the results aren't in yet, but the location, the sites where those deaths occurred involved bikes turning and being hit by, wiped out just by trucks turning, or bikes, excuse me, proceeding, trucks turning. And the bikes happen to have been, by the best information I can gather, in protected bike lanes. And then they got to an intersection, and then they sadly were in a crash with a turning truck. That's 2 of the 3 incidents recently in Cambridge where bicyclists were killed. So these transitions are really important. I don't think we have any evidence to validate that by moving the bicyclists over to a protected lane for a block and a half, they'll be safer when they transition to that very dangerous intersection. I've done a lot of biking myself. Closest I ever came to what could have been, and I'm not exaggerating, a very, very serious collision with a vehicle was when I transitioned back into the street from a protected lane, and it can happen. So I raise these questions. I think we have a solution to that one and only question mark hanging over this project. And surprisingly enough, the solution is that we may have an equally safe treatment of the provisions for bicyclists there now. And that same treatment is undoubtedly better for the businesses, at least according to those businesses, because it preserves parking spaces that are getting eliminated under the proposed plan. So those are going to be my reasons for opposing this, and I thank everybody for bearing with me while I went through them.
Okay, Paul was first.
And I congratulate you. I think you did it under 7 minutes, John. Thank you.
Well, I'm surprised myself.
But I wanted to just speak to a couple of points that you made. As you know, I live in St. Mary's. It used to have parking, the sidewalk, then parking, and then a painted cycle lane. And a few years ago, the configuration changed to sidewalk, dedicated protected bike lane, and then parking. And I remember when that transition was happening, and the businesses were very concerned about all the disruptions that was going to happen, and so on and so forth, and all the dangers. I'm in that area every single day, multiple times a day. So the idea that someone stepping out of a vehicle to cross the cycle track, whether it's raised or not, and in St. Mary's, it's not raised, it's actually at street level, that, somehow that would be hazardous for someone to cross that transition from where they're in their vehicle over to the sidewalk, as they have to cross the cycle track to and fro the business. I've never seen a collision happen. I often park there with my children. They get out, you look, and then you cross. And so now maybe there is some data that shows it, but when there's an officer or any type of first responder in St. Mary's, I know about it because the flashing lights go into my windows. So I haven't seen that be a problem. The other issue that you raised about having to step out into traffic, in St. Mary's, that's exactly the configuration. So from Park Drive in Boston, they initiated the protected bike lane from Park Drive to St. Mary's Street, and then Brookline did St. Mary's Street to Carlton Street. And when you open your door, you're opening your door into traffic. I know of no incidences where any doors have been taken off or people getting out of their vehicles have been hit, that I'm aware of. And again, I know what's going on there. And frankly, this is a normal activity throughout Brookline. I live on Carlton Street. If I park in front of my house and I open my door, there is a travel lane, a car going next to me, and just as easily as anything else. So I think this is the idea that somehow we're making automobile drivers less safe by asking them to open their door and they have to step out where the travel lane might be. This happens throughout Brookline. And I'm not aware of it being a huge major issue of people having their doors ripped off by vehicles. I did a field trip a short time ago over to Inman Square. In Inman Square, in front of the SNS, if you know the old SNS, I think that's Cambridge Street. There's a stretch of a raised bike lane. There's a sidewalk. There's a raised bike lane, exactly what we're proposing. And then there's a bus stop, and then there's the street for a segment. I went over there. I did a field trip. I spent over an hour talking with the manager of the SNS because they overlook the area. I talked to a couple of cyclists. I talked to a couple of pedestrians. I talked to a resident in the area. And they had no issues with this configuration, and they saw no loss of business because that configuration was in place. Now, I didn't poll every single business, but I just want to confirm from my small sampling of actually go visualize and see the operation of what these things look like. I saw it to be a very positive experience.
Okay.
And I want to address one more thing. I haven't reached his 7 minutes. The issue about the loss of spaces up in Washington Square. First, I'm very sensitive. I'm glad that it was raised by the individual that raised it. I think she's the vice chair of the Small Business Committee. But I want to be clear. We've heard a commitment by the commissioner of DPW and the chair of the Transportation Board that just like Brookline Village, which had similar concerns, they will get a parking study, they will get wayfinding design, and they will get a design review support from the community. But 18 spaces is about 10% of the available parking in the area. I'm certain that the study would be able to optimize the use of that parking to make a quick turn and potentially find other areas. So I feel pretty confident that the issues that you raise, although I understand why you're raising them, that for this particular project, for me, they're not something that would prevent me from supporting it.
Michael?
So I will say, John, you've done your homework and dug out some, the photographs are interesting. And
He always does. He used to be
yeah, he is.
a
John absolutely does his homework. The question is, what kind of grade I want to give it as a teacher? So you've correctly identified the area beyond the project as being a difficult place for cyclists and pedestrians as you get into Route 9. There's no question about it. And it seems to me that your solution is to eliminate the safe lane for the previous block and a half, which I don't really understand as a cyclist and a pedestrian. And for that matter, as a driver, there's no sense of
Happy to
taking
explain
away.
it again.
I'm sorry?
I'm happy to explain it again.
Well, you don't. Yeah,
It's
I
the
think-
transition,
I'm not sure that
Mike.
you're gonna. I'm not sure
Mike,
that you're gonna
it's the
penetrate my brain.
transition.
John, like I told
I
the
know.
audience,
Yeah.
please put your information in writing and send it to us.
Yeah.
So send it to me again. But I don't understand the linkage that you're trying to draw between the two. The one thing that I will say to you, and the same thing I've said to you previously, is that there's no question that when I'm on a bicycle, I feel very substantially less safe in a shallow lane, in a lane that's within traffic, than I do on a separated lane, whether the separated lane is raised or not. And when I'm a driver, I feel much more comfortable with a cyclist in that separated lane than I do when they're driving next to my my right fender. And I'm sure that they feel safer, even just as I do when there isn't a car there. So I really quarrel with the contention that you have that everything would work out okay if we just took away that that constriction and the loss of parking in that block and a half.
David?
So I have a question regarding bump outs for outdoor dining. I appreciate that Emily Jacobson shared with members of the select board, a memo showing examples in other communities and also proposed examples that could potentially work here in Brookline on Washington Street that would allow both to coexist, where essentially the lane is not perfectly straight and sometimes you go around briefly and then you go back into the main track. This proposal, though, the cycle track would be elevated. It's not at street level, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And would that render it impossible to make minor modifications later on to have bump outs in the event that the select board decided to authorize outdoor dining?
No, no.
But how would
I
that work
can't-
practically speaking if you are on street level briefly and then you go back up onto the elevated cycle track?
So the folks that will be delivering the food, is that what your question is?
No, about the bicyclists. So if you have a bump out for the bicyclists that they're going around
Okay.
where the outdoor dining is occurring,
Yep.
presumably the portion where they're going around would be at street level. So is there a fairly easy way to reconfigure sort of on the fly those portions where the bike lane would be going around outdoor dining? Or is that not practical?
I'm sorry, I don't follow you.
Why do you think the outdoor dining would be at street level? It would be on the sidewalk at that point.
On the sidewalk, yes.
So the sidewalk would be at the same level as the bike lane.
Right, but if the bike lane is going onto the street briefly to go around, it
Yep.
would be going lower. So my question is
Potentially.
there a modification that is simple to implement where you go back up onto the sidewalk level from street level?
Amy?
If I may, the short answer is not really. We don't have the width in this case to do something like that. If you can imagine a bicyclist coming off of a sidewalk level bike lane into the only width that we have would be just a regular painted 5-foot bike lane adjacent to like a wall that's protecting the outdoor dining on one side and then a travel lane on the other side. We have this thing called shy distance when there's like a vertical separation of some kind. People don't want to bike really close to it because there are handlebars and all these other things. So all you have is this little tiny space with a 5-foot bike lane and moving the outdoor dining on one side and moving vehicles on the other. And that's just not, that doesn't meet any standards. We would like to have a buffer, but we don't have the space for that. Even if we make everything across the cross-section minimum, we don't have space for that.
All right.
Okay, thank you. Okay, John, one more time.
Thank you. And I wouldn't ask for this, but you know, a couple of the things I said were, you know, rightly questioned by a couple of the members of the board. And I just want to make a point. If there are comparisons to be made, they have to be made apples and apples and not apples and oranges. People who have visited the St. Mary's area that is near and dear to Paul and that he described, no, it's not anything like the section of the village we're talking about. It has it has the best sidewalks in the entire town. On one side, on the westbound side. On the eastbound side, which is much more like what we have in the village, they kept the parking, even though it meant bikes had only a sharrow, not even a painted lane. So if for no other reason than consistency, I'd like us to at least think through what do we think is the way to do bike lanes for maximum safety for bicyclists, for pedestrians, and for cars, drivers. Because clearly, we don't think it has to be a cycle track everywhere in Brookline. And I'm sure there are areas, in fact, I can name one of them, which is the village along, you know, at the section of the village that passes through one Brookline Place and 2 Brookline Place. We have a beautiful track there.
Okay.
We also have empty storefront there. So, you know, that's the point vis-a-vis Paul. And Mike also knows that I wasn't talking about, what I was talking about was the transition from the track to the no man's land opposite the fire station where there's no protection at all for bicyclists. And I was talking about the fact that protected lanes are only protected insofar as when the bicyclist gets to an intersection from the protected lane, are they less likely, the same, or more likely to be in an incident with a car than they would be if they were in the street? I don't think we have hard data on that.
Okay.
Hey, Brian, that's kind of rude. I'm sorry, it's kind of rude.
Okay, let's.
I listened to you. I didn't look at my watch while you were speaking.
I'm sorry, my watch is beeping at me.
And I think it
Wait,
contributes
wait, that's-
contributes to the idea here
hold on,
that
hold
the
on.
merchants weren't really listened to when they raised their points.
John, I think that the team has taken in your comments.
I'm sure.
And hopefully, to the extent that it's possible, they can incorporate some of your concerns. Although I think that, to some degree, you're asking them to sort of start from ground zero, or, start from the beginning on some of the proposals you're making. I'm not sure that, is feasible. But I just hope that, the concerns that you've raised are addressed in some way. And, if we want to continue this discussion into the night, we can, but I don't think that it's very helpful. We've had a good presentation that I think answered a lot of questions that people had. But I'll give Paul an opportunity to briefly.
Oh, it's very, very briefly. I'm going to take that as an offer to move on, Bernard.
Yes.
And I have a suggestion.
Okay.
I sense that we're done with deliberations because we're
We've
not going to
beaten
spend
this
all night.
horse.
We have beaten this horse to a cycle track. And we were asked this evening to provide guidance to the Transportation Board, and I would like to propose a motion to provide that guidance if I may. If
What's the
that's
motion?
okay, I'll read it to you.
Okay.
And so a move that the Select Board transmits to the Transportation Board its support of the 25% Washington Street design proposal as recommended by the Design Review Committee, including the wayfinding design component and the proposed parking studies for both Brookline Village and Washington Square that will be completed by the 75% design milestone and supported by advisory groups made up of abutting residents and businesses. That would be the motion. It's not our vote to go to the state.
David?
I have a question that's somewhat related to Paul's formulation, which is, could we go over the logistics here about the different votes we take and when, at the 25% level, at the 75% level? Because I would certainly want assurance that before this is completely finalized, we would have the results of the parking and curb use analysis. Because I think a critical piece we're missing, and it's not the fault of the presenters, is just having an understanding of how are we currently utilizing parking in Washington Square and Brookline Village? What are the other opportunities that are available? For example, there's Beacon Orthodontics on Washington Street, pretty large parking lot, and it's not too far from Washington Square. And currently that's for dental office. And at night, the lot is basically empty. So just looking at potential opportunities to include more parking spaces in these areas so that we can offer reassurance to those who are not within walking distance of these businesses and to the businesses themselves that there will still be opportunities for vehicular traffic to come into the area. But that's information that I would want to know before rendering a final opinion about this project. And I think that's really critical because I totally support having dedicated bike lanes. I appreciate this presentation and the scope and what this project would entail. But I do think that's the missing piece about understanding the ramifications on businesses. And right now, it seems like we're just guessing at it.
So the parking study and curb analysis, the data collection, the analysis, the recommendations, we will have that. You will have those results before a vote on the 75% design.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think it's right to have a motion at this point. So
What do you mean at all, or do you? what do you mean?
vote on a motion at all. I mean, you identified certain things that you want to ensure they're included in deliberations of the Transportation Board. John mentioned a few things. David mentioned, his concerns.
Yeah.
I think that you know, at this point, we don't have a position other than here are the issues we want you to look at.
Well, so I guess, can I respond to that?
Of course.
So the Transportation Board is going to vote, is it tomorrow night? They're going to vote tomorrow night.
And we're going to vote on the
Yep,
11th.
yep. And, you know, I believe it would be very helpful for the Transportation Board to understand the general position of this board. I don't believe the general position of this board is John Van Scoyak's position. I just don't believe it is.
I don't either.
Yeah, okay, and even John doesn't believe it.
But I agree with the chair. I
But
think-
so this is not a vote about moving it forward to the state. It's a statement directionally to the board, to the Transportation Board, saying, we support the design that was presented to us this evening. There's some qualifications that I think are very important, which are the parking studies and the wayfinding design to be completed as part of the 75% by the time we see the 75% design. And I think that guidance is important to provide to the Transportation Board. So they know what they're sending back to us, because they approve something, might have to modify it. And we're not modifying parking spaces, I don't believe.
I'd vote against that.
Okay.
I don't know what other people would do.
Well, I think I'd much rather, I have a sense that there's more than a majority of support for the overall project as designed. If it's a matter of taking a vote and ending up 3-2 instead of waiting and having a vote of 4-1, I'd rather have the 4-1 vote.
Yeah.
So what are we transmitting to the Transportation Board?
Well,
How are they going to get something? They're going to watch the tape?
Well,
What are they going to do?
Watch their tape.
Brian's been patiently standing here, absorbing this, and I think he can see.
Can I ask him what his interpretation is,
Yeah.
Brian?
Okay.
If it's all right with you, Mr. Chairman, I've been taking very copious notes, both on my computer and on my my pad here. And sorry, my watch buzzed, John. It does that. It's an Apple Watch. Was not ignoring you. So I've taken, I get what you're saying, and this will all be transmitted back to the Transportation Board tomorrow. I'll do the best I can to summarize this 2 hours of discussion. I mean, it would be incredibly helpful to have something very tangible from you folks. I'll be honest. If that's not possible, we'll do the best.
I mean, even John, present his materials, which I think is a written.
I'm
out
planning to
statement.
do it anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Paul, make your written presentation to them, and David too. I mean, those are concrete things. Beyond that, I think, Brian's notes is what we're conveying to him.
Bernard, I may have something to say as
Okay.
well.
Of course.
But I'm happy to put that in writing.
Yeah, you have open meeting law problems there.
Okay.
So are you asking us to individually repeat what we said tonight, where we just deliberated for
Yes,
2
because
hours?
as Chad said, we have an open meeting law issue.
No,
here.
well, if we do, right now, we don't have an open meeting law violation.
Oh.
Right now, we have a notice,
There wasn't on the agenda that we take a vote. Right?
Yeah.
So you could theoretically, I mean, this is all about what you want to do. You can take a vote to the purpose of this agenda item is to give the Transportation Board guidance, and it's up to you to determine what form that guidance takes. So an indicative vote saying this is our guidance to the T-Board, that's allowed. What you can't do is take the final vote.
I agree with that.
You
It's gotta
can't
come
take a
back to
binding
us.
vote because there's nothing before you to vote on. The T-Board has to vote first. And second, that's not noticed. But whether that guidance takes the form of an indicative vote or individual statements from the board members or whatever, you can do either of those things. But, that's the T-Board is asking for whatever you can do in terms of concrete. So whether that's individual statements of the board members or a vote of the board, an indicative vote of the board to transmit guidance, you could do either of those things.
Bernard, would you be comfortable with a motion that says that the Select Board supports the overall
Except we won't have a unanimous select board, so.
Well, I know we won't have a unanimous select board, but if we have a 4-1, then that's the best we're gonna do, okay. As I say, if we're gonna have to wait in order to get a 4-1 vote until next week, then, okay. But they're asking for guidance, and I think it's sensible to put something on the record, something perhaps stripped down from the specificity that that Paul has. But I do get the sense that there is broad support for the 25% plan as we see it.
Yeah, no, I think there's broad support, but I just wonder whether we are ready to express that support, since the plan is that, you know, the Transportation Board would hear from us, and they've heard from us, and that then they would deliberate at their meeting tomorrow and send something back to us, at which point we will vote. It seems to me that that is a process that's set up,
Right.
and to try to, you know, scamper around it by getting, you know, by getting a position in the record before that,
Well, if they,
is not the appropriate thing. I'm sorry.
Just is the transportation board going to be, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but do you get the sense that the transportation board is going to be fundamentally changing what's been presented to us tonight? What's going to be any different?
We are incredibly responsive to you folks who are elected, and we want to make sure that we're getting you what you want. So what has been worked on had 2 transportation board members on the DRC. The other folks haven't seen this yet. So we're going to be going through a lot of the same stuff and answering a lot of the same questions. So as I said, it would be very helpful to get a sense from you folks of what you would like us to sort of provide to you. And whether or not this will be dramatically different a week from now or not, I can't say. I don't want to prejudice it. I would suggest if you want to stagger your appearances tomorrow, we'd love to hear from you all, but I'm not sure how to even make that work.
Okay, why don't each person who wants to present something, present in writing to Brian? I mean, it's on your computers, at least the 2 of you. Just forward it.
well, I don't, well, when you say it's on my computer, all I did was made a
You're
motion.
reading?
I didn't read anything tonight.
Okay.
Everything was off the top of my head, Bernard. I've been spending a year on this thing. So what I don't understand is the Transportation Board came to us this evening because they wanted to get a sense from us about what we thought. What I'm hearing is that at least 4 of us, I believe, are in agreement with the 25% design. One of us has big problems with Davis Street.
No.
For the last piece.
Yeah.
The last piece, right? Has a problem with it. I wouldn't want the Transportation Board to go, oh, if we send this back to the Select Board, they're not going to approve it. We have to get rid of that cycle raised lane in Brooklyn, in the Brookline Village area, because Vince Quake was against it. So
Unlikely to let him do that.
well, I don't know. I just,
No offense.
No, I absolutely agree. I keep making that point to people. I don't know why people get so agitated that there's one member of the select board that doesn't agree with the other 4, you know.
I'm not agitated.
But I think we can wait.
Yeah, we can wait, and the process is set up so that we wait. We wait until the 11th. That's when we vote. I'm not sure why we have to.
So we've now used up 15 minutes talking about why we what to do with this. I think it's really sensible to let's let it pass. I think people have heard from each of us individually. There's no question. I haven't read a 7-minute statement or even a 2-minute statement, but I've asked enough questions so that I think that Brian can convey that I'm certainly very much in favor of what they're doing with the questions that I raise about outdoor dining being a caution.
Okay, David, and then I want to let Commissioner Shute.
So again, regarding outdoor dining, and this is related, but at some point, are we going to look at the feasibility of rooftop dining? Because given the limitations we have with our street width and trying to accommodate all these different interests, that might be a way to alleviate some of the space crunch.
We haven't put that on the radar yet, but I know you've raised it in the past. It is an interesting concept. Let me talk to economic development because they would have the best sense there. I think the best way to do that is to do similar to what we did with outdoor dining, is poll folks and get their attention. So let me talk to Meredith and the team in economic development, and we will get that back to you, but we'll put that down and make sure that we follow up.
Thank you.
Eric?
Thank you.
For the benefit of the board, I just wanted to add that all iterations of kind of bike lane accommodation was explored going through the entire corridor. And this idea of terminating the cycle track and going into a sharo or shared use or on-street lane was looked at. There was a lot of feedback and comments, and ultimately the design review committee contemplated that and all other options and decided on the dedicated bike lane. So I just want to make sure that the board knows that this is not the first time that idea has been put forward. It was evaluated by the design review committee.
Okay, so what are we doing here?
You're the chair. You
Paul, yeah, I'm gonna tell you. Excuse me. Okay, Paul has a motion. I'm not gonna stop him from making that motion. We can vote on that. And then I also suggest that people convey their thoughts to the transportation board.
Yes, so I'd like,
individually.
I'd like to get a sense. Does
Okay, is this a sense or is it?
a sense? I'm not making a motion, Bernard. Just want to get a sense. Does the board want to provide some collective guidance back to the transportation board, or do they want to do it individually? David?
I think it makes more sense to do it collectively, especially since
I'm
that's what.
scared.
Okay, Bernard, could you poll the board on what I just asked, please?
I'm sure this. Okay, I'm losing control here. Okay. Okay, David, what do you think? There are two things on that we're thinking about. A formal resolution, I assume is what you're talking about, or informally providing information to the transportation board on our positions in preparation for a vote on the 11th, which has been set up as a time when we actually vote on this project.
I think it's certainly fine for the board to express in short form what our discussion ultimately concluded, which it sounds like most of us agree with the general parameters of this proposal. We would like to see, prior to the 75% mark of project design, that the results of the parking and curb use analysis, and a minority of the board express concern about the final portion in Brookline Village, and just sort of express that factually.
A minority. Okay. Yeah. A minority, one member, has his position in opposition. My position is different. My position is we're not ready to vote. We set it for February the 11th to have a vote after receiving back any comments or any guidance from the transportation board. That's when we ought to do that. I'm generally in favor of this, but I don't want to say that we're ready to make that determination at this point.
And I agree with you. I'm not suggesting we make a final determination, just essentially expressing that it's the general will of the board to move forward with this, subject to the limitations that Paul articulated about by the 75th percent stage, that we have the results of the parking and curb use analysis, and that a member of the board expressed concern for the Brookline Village portion. That's essentially the minutes version of our discussion. And I think that's what the transportation board is looking for. I would be interested, if you want, I'm obviously not trying to put you on the spot, but if you want to offer your opinion on the substance of the proposal, is there something else that's holding you back, or?
There's nothing holding me back. I'm just, we said that we're going to vote on the 11th. Now, maybe I'm being a little formalistic here, but there's no reason for us to change that schedule. In my view, we may get new information, new insight, new written comments from the public, and we may want to say something a little different. We have that opportunity on the 11th. We're not ready yet, in my opinion. So, I think Mike had his hand up.
I'm done.
Okay.
No, I mean, just to point out the obvious, the discussion of the transportation board itself is one I'm sure that will be well worth listening to and might actually have an impact on people's thinking. And I'm looking forward to that discussion and to the vote on the 11th.
Okay,
Sir, can I ask a question? Oh, what do you expect from us on the 11th? Do you want to do this all again? How are we gonna do this?
so you're gonna look at the same presentation.
Yeah.
From the standpoint of your expertise,
Yes.
and you're gonna come back to us.
You want a
with-
letter?
Pardon me?
Do we like a memo or a letter or, okay,
Well,
Whatever the final version of the
Whatever.
proposal is.
got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, yeah, we're relying on you.
Yep.
To use your expert eyes and experience to, confirm or otherwise, the proposal that's before us. On the basis of that, the select board will be in a position to say, which I assume we will, that we agree with this general design.
Okay, thank you.
Can I say
But-
one
so
more,
you-
can I
you-
say one more
Why
thing?
don't you
I'm
just do your,
Well, but so let me, but I'm sensitive to what you're saying, and I don't want to run you over, so I'm being very sensitive to your issue. And and I know Regina's getting impatient with us. So if we were to at least share with them that at least 3 members of the board are supportive of the 25% design, blah, 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 subject to feedback, it may be more. I think it's important that they know that they've got 3 votes on the board to move this thing to the state. Like this is what I think is important for them to know. They need 3 votes. We need 3 votes from this board to move the proposal to the state. We don't need 4, we don't need 5, we need 3. And it would be great to have 5. But
Yeah.
if the takeaway is they're chewing on this thing and they couldn't even make a recommendation to us, their feedback, and they had to do it individually, that sounds like a divided board to me. And we're not a
Apparently
divided
we
board.
are.
Well, only on the timing. But anyway, that's my view. I guess does someone
Okay,
want to
look,
make the motion?
make your motion and we'll vote on it and.
Well, I think David had the right words.
Did you write them down?
Okay, so I'm gonna
Let me
read.
take a crack.
I'm going to redo it. I'm going to make my motion and then someone can amend it. So move that the select board transmits to the transportation board its general support of the 25% Washington Street design proposal as recommended by the Design Review Committee, including wayfinding design component and the proposed parking studies for both Brookline Village and Washington Square that will be completed by the 75% design milestone and supported by advisory groups made up of abutting residents and businesses. That's our guidance. Now, they may take that and change it and
Okay, Mike,
decide.
do you have another?
Well, I was going to say something much simpler.
Okay, so
That we support the design embodied in the 25% plan and leave it at that.
Okay, is that a friendly amendment?
Paul, is that okay?
can I ask you a question about that?
Sure.
I need to qualify. I have a question. If it comes back to us just like that,
Mhm.
and it doesn't include, parking studies for Brookline Village and Washington Square, wayfinding that comes back by 75% design, are we going to add that next week?
I don't think that will happen.
Okay,
And so I'm willing to take the risk.
okay.
Point of clarification, just Washington Square parking study will not be done before 75%. We don't have the bandwidth to do that. We don't have the budget to do that. We see that as probably a bridle path analysis.
I think it's imperative.
So we're
Well,
looking at what we've committed to, so this is, we've talked about Washington Street, but as part of, about Beacon Street as part of Washington Square as part of the Beacon Street bridle path. We have committed to and have funding for a parking and curb analysis for the village. It is an extensive process and analysis, feedback, and that we are looking to have completed before we move to the 75% design. For Washington Square, I think what we talked about is there's a minimal amount of parking that is being removed and a lot of parking that is available on side streets, on Beacon Street, and that this project is not having a significant impact on that. So that is something to evaluate, but we were not looking to have Washington Square done by then.
Well, I think we need to reorder our priorities then, because frankly, I'm not going to be comfortable supporting a project that eliminates over 30% of our parking without knowing whether there's a need for that parking, where that parking could be, the impact on businesses. So at the 25% threshold, I'm okay with that because I'm assuming we're going to have that information. We'll work with businesses. And now I'm hearing we're not going to have that. That's troubling.
So we don't have a 3-vote majority.
No, so you're confusing two different
Yeah.
things. What Aaron's talking about is what a parking study for Washington Square. What the 30% references the whole of the street, the whole of the project area.
Right.
There's only 10% that's going to be removed in Washington
Washington
Square, and you will have the curbside study in time to make for the 75% vote in terms of the utilization of the existing 200 or 190 spaces.
But that's only half of the story. If the utilization is high, then we would need to know what are we going to do to compensate, and that needs to be a part of this.
Oh,
so
sure.
if that's not going to be a part of this, then I'm very troubled with it.
Yep.
So I think it's critically important we have that information prior to the 75% milestone.
I just said that I think we will. Am I correct in that?
So we committed to, meaning the town and the design review committee voted on a parking and curb use analysis for Brookline Village. And that's a large area. The request for Washington Square is new. That was not part of the vote. And actually, we have some utilization information I think that is worthwhile for you to hear on Washington Street and that area. So there's an analysis that was done in terms of available parking, what's being removed, and what that utilization looks like. I think that would be helpful for you to know in terms of the necessity for that right now. So I'm going to ask Amy Ingles to share that with you.
So this is for the Washington Square area. We did some counts along Washington Street, of course, for the corridor, but we also did some in the business districts on some nearby streets. For example, on Beacon Street, we went out to in both directions, and really the utilization for the most part was 50, 70, something like that. That's the average utilization that we saw and we got 61 different counts out there. We were sending our interns out there basically every day. And different times of the day, even in the evening after regular hours. So we got a lot of data there. It was very, very rare that something was maxed out. And that wasn't even all the side streets. It's a whole bunch of side streets that don't have metered parking. University, Winthrop, Fairbanks, Salisbury, Westburn Terrace, that have 2-hour parking. That would be enough for many of the people that visit the area.
I guess that, so.
Okay, so Mike has a motion amending yours. Do you accept it or not?
I do.
Okay. Brian, did you have your hand up? You wanted to say something?
Just with respect to the Washington Square parking area, I have committed the transportation board that I chair to doing this. And what that means is we will seek funding from you folks and the other appropriate folks and Mr. Carey to do that such that it is done by the time you guys get a 75% design. I think what the commissioner is saying is that we can't absolutely guarantee you tonight that those two will line up exactly, but we are going to certainly strive to do it. And you folks are going to have a lot more bites at this proverbial apple before any shovels go in the ground, and it'll definitely be here before final votes are taken or final approval is given.
Okay, so Mike's resolution is on the floor. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. John Van Scoyac.
No.
Michael Sandman.
Aye.
Point of order?
Yes.
No,
excuse me.
Oh,
You're in violation of the open meeting law if you do this.
Sit down, please. Sit down.
Parliamentary
down.
procedures.
Sit
Don't
down.
talk to me that way, young man. It's in violation of the open meeting law. You didn't advertise we're going to take a vote. You can't take a vote.
Please sit down.
Brian,
Thank
let her
you.
go.
Okay, where was I?
Do I start?
Mike, did you vote?
I did in violation of the open meeting law according to the expert.
Paul?
Just to be clear, we are voting to transmit a
We're
letter.
voting our sense of support for the 25%.
Okay, to transmit a letter.
yeah,
Yep,
right.
yes, aye.
David?
Aye.
Chair votes no. Okay, that's it. Thank you. We'll see you next time. Okay. See, I needed my mallet.
Sorry.
Yeah,
We've been doing so well.
Right, not for Regina, for the board.
Yeah, or some combination thereof.
Okay, next item on the agenda is question of amending the charge of the Expenditure and Revenue Study Committee. And then question of making appointments to that committee. Ches, you want to summarize your revision to the charge?
Sure. The charge revision just incorporates the fact that alternate members can be appointed. I also just want to note there are two Scrivener's errors in here that I need to correct, and that's my fault, so I apologize. One is a reference on page 1 to the work being the potential vote being in 2020. I'm sorry, on page 2 to the vote being in 2027. No, the vote will be in 2026, not 2027. And then there's a reference on page 1 as well to the committee's work being finished by September of 2026. That should read September of 2025. So apologies, just some confusions in
Okay, that's a
fiscal
big
year.
change,
Yeah, making sure that the timeline is accurately reflected there. So those are two Scrivener's errors that I would just ask that the vote reflect. And otherwise, it's adding the possibility of alternate members, which the chair and vice chair suggested as a way to increase participation from the elected and appointed committees, with also having additional citizen participation. So what that basically means is you have three appointees from each of the three constituent bodies of the House School Partnership, Select Board, Advisory Committee, School Committee. You also have 3 alternates for those positions. Those individuals don't vote unless their principal is absent, in which case they can vote and form a quorum. That will allow for the body to, 1, it solves quorum problems, and 2, it allows for participation of additional members. But you still then have a full committee with 6 citizen participants, and you're not then having a committee of, 12, 13.
Yeah, and I would emphasize that the alternate's role is to be full participants in the deliberations of the committee, so that it's not just the voting members. Sorry, John?
Just as a clarification, so that no one misunderstands, 3 alternates, 1 from each of them.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah,
correct.
that's
Thank
okay.
you.
Yeah.
Okay, Mike?
I'm okay. No, I'm fine.
Okay, so I move,
Good, David, sorry.
I do have a question. So looking at the docket item, it appears that there would be a total of 8 members, or
Oh, so the docket item for the appointing member,
right?
There's still a blank there. We're still awaiting
Okay.
one final member,
Yeah.
one final member's confirmation, but we wanted to move on this so that we could start the process of getting people onboarded.
yeah.
Okay.
That was my point. Actually, I missed that John Doggett was the advisory committee's rep, as opposed to a citizen rep. So we have 5. Looking at this, I think there's one person under 60. And I think that it would really be nice to find somebody else under 60.
We've looked.
And I can appreciate that, but this is a.
Let me, let's vote on the.
Vote on
charge.
these,
On the
but
charge.
looking for that last person, if you can
I'm gonna.
pay
address
some
that.
attention to
Yeah.
the
Can I ask one?
diversity of age.
Okay,
Can I ask just one question? So I assume this committee is going to come with periodic updates to the board?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we're building out now and what I want to present at the finance, the big joint meeting on the financial plan.
Yep.
I'd like to actually have that be a joint meeting, not just between the select board and the advisory committee, but have this committee, this new committee, be noticed as well, so that those members can all appear and ask questions about the financial plan. And then what I'd like to do from there is I'd like to put forward a general timeline for the committee's operations so that people have a sense of what the timeline is and where the regular check-in points with the board are, so that we're not in a situation where we're gathering information and then suddenly it's September and we need to make a decision on something.
No, we also talked about a budget 101 meeting. Would that be the joint meeting?
My thought is to do that as the joint meeting.
Okay, all in favor of the amended charge of the Expenditure and Revenue Study Committee, please indicate by saying aye. John Van Scoyac.
Aye.
Michael Sandman.
Aye.
Paul Warren.
Aye.
David Perlman.
Aye.
Your vote's aye. Next, question of making appointments to the Expenditures and Revenue Study Committee. The town administrator explained the voting members and alternates for the three boards. The public members are Dick Benka, Ruth Ellen Fitch, Jeff Rudolph. I think he's under 60, right?
He's the one.
He's the one. He's
He's
the
the
one.
one.
Janet Gelbart, Sergio Modigliani, me, Select Board Chair, and Sarah Mukhtar for the School Committee as the voting member, and John Doggart as the Advisory Committee voting member. We still need one more public member. The people that we wanted to appoint had either obligations or reasons for not accepting. So what I'd like to do is to, if any of you have some suggestions, let us know. I take your point that, we need someone under 60. If people in the audience would like to apply for the committee, there will be an application form on the town's website for boards and commissions on, I believe, by Friday, right? Yeah, okay. And then, we will, look at the applications and make a decision as to who to put on the committee. Hopefully we'll find someone under the age of 60.
Maybe even.
That's
under
really
the
not
age of
funny, I'm
55,
sorry.
who knows?
Pardon me?
Maybe even under the age of 55. Who knows?
Yeah, or under the age of 30. Okay, so I move approval of the appointments to the Expenditures and Revenue Study Committee, subject to the, need to find one more person. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. John Van Scoyac.
Aye.
Michael Sandman.
Aye.
Paul Warren.
Aye.
David Perlman.
Aye.
And chair votes aye. And that,
Before you can end the meeting.
wait,
We have public comment too.
Okay.
we have public.
Yes.
Well, before you
Let me
do
just
public
say
comment,
that.
because I
That's the
wanted to
end of
get,
our
I
agenda.
wanted to get to before public comment.
Okay, you have something on the
Yeah,
agenda?
no, I'm gonna just raise an issue
Okay.
and you're gonna call me crazy, but I'm gonna raise an issue.
Why would I call you crazy?
I want to ask the question about open meeting law. And, a member of the public raised a concern about our vote. I first want to ask the town administrator, were we within our authority to take such a vote and
I
why?
consulted with town council and the answer is yes. Town council is online and he can give the explanation. Joe, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Nope, that's quite all right. So Joe Callahan, Town Council, I've been paying attention to the meeting just off camera. So I heard the residents' concern. However, when you have an agenda item that's on a noticed agenda, there's an expectation that anything reasonably foreseeable or naturally flowing from that agenda debate, you could put to a vote. It's not a binding vote because what the Transportation Board Chair is asking for the Select Board to share a sense with that board, what you're doing. So I think it's perfectly appropriate. I have no concern that it was an open meeting law violation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that is, hold on. That's the end of our agenda, and we're going to enter into the period of the meeting where we continue public comment. And I see one person at the dais.
Dina Frawley.
But hold on, let me.
It's not amusing. I
No,
care
it's not
deeply about
amusing.
process, so please
It's
treat
not
me with
amusing, and
respect.
no one's laughing. But,
Then you have the smile on your face.
and I
You
have a
said
right
that.
to
I don't want to
smile.
hear what you
I
have
have
to
a
say.
right
It's
to
my
smile.
turn. It's my turn.
Not until I give you your turn.
You just opened it for public comment. I heard the words.
I was still talking. Go ahead.
Regina Frawley from Precinct 16, and what you just heard from town councilors is opposite what every other town council has ever said here. You did not write in the agenda, you published, that even had the word possible vote. You didn't even do that. So you can call it a sense of the meeting, you can call it a recommendation. It's effectively a vote, and you violated the open meeting law. Write those agendas with more carefulness. In the past, I've also not appreciated that you put possible vote because that throws a lot of people off. But you have done it, and this town administrator has done that in the past. This didn't even have that in it. You have violated the open meeting law, and I will file a formal complaint first thing in the morning. Absolutely. That's point one. What I was going to say, I will say, but I will do it actually publicly and embarrass you all.
Our obligation is to follow the determination of town council, who we pay to make these. Excuse me.
It's also history, past
I'm
practice.
talking. Our responsibility is to follow the guidance of town council, who we pay for that guidance. I may not always agree with town council, but I will follow him because that's his job to figure out what is the correct legal position. So, is there anyone else?
I do want to say something to that.
No, your time is up.
I didn't have 3 minutes.
Public comment is not a back and forth.
Yeah.
You came.
Well, then I'll do just the talking and you can just
All right,
listen.
Regina, will you please not be so confrontational with us?
Well, you're very much violating the open meeting law, and you know darn well that's what I care most about is
Okay,
process.
so
You know that
we did not-
historically.
That's good enough for me. Is there anyone else who would like to make public comment?
There is no one else indicating their desire to
Okay.
speak.
So I would like,
So
I
with
would
that-
like to, can I ask a question? of
Sure.
My board, is there anybody who would have a sense of reconsidering that prior vote and instead ask that the town administrator transmit the minutes of this meeting to the transportation board? It summarize the discussion.
Your minutes won't be voted on. And I think it would be tough for us to compile the minutes of the entire discussion
Yep.
within 24 hours. I genuinely don't think there's a need. For one thing, what we put on the agenda when we talk about calendar, it says under the calendar items, review and potential vote on calendar items. That is always a catch-all provision on here that puts.
And that's all the things that are underneath that include that language.
Now, but even if that were not sufficient, I think the language on there that was included about saying input received from the select board is to be shared with the transportation board. It indicates that you are going to give them input of some kind. Now, whether that is input that you all kind of come together as the sense of and vote on,
Right.
or whether that is your individual whatever, I think all of that any of that is fine, right? The public was put on notice that the purpose of this session was to give the transportation board guidance. The form of guidance that took could be a vote of the sense of the board, or it could not be. That's perfectly clear from the text of that. And as Bernard said, as the chair said, your formal vote will come on the 11th
Right.
in response to whatever the transportation board provides.
Which could be a different
Which could
vote
be
than
a
what we
different
took
thing
tonight.
altogether. That is correct.
All right,
So.
thank you.
Okay, with that, the meeting ends.
Who are you kidding?